Hello, everyone, and welcome to this meeting. And I call the meeting to order, this 39th meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security in pursuant to the agenda of February 26, 2026 and the Standing Order 81.4. The committee is meeting to consider the main estimates 2026-27. I would like to welcome the Honourable Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness and all the officials, very dedicated and very numerous, here with him today, and who will remain with us, I think, through the second hour, which allows us to move immediately to the Minister's presentation. You have 5 minutes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank you for having me here today to speak about the 2026-27 main estimates for public safety portfolios.
That we're on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I'm joined by my colleagues from the respective portfolio agencies, and I want to thank them and their teams for the work that they've been doing. The main estimates reflect our government's priorities to keep communities safe, combat modern national security threats and foreign interference, strengthen our borders, and assert our economic sovereignty. We're focused on building stronger, safer communities that are free from violence. That is why this past March I announced our renewal of the Building Safer Communities Fund. With more than $150 million in funding, we're building on our strong partnerships with municipalities and Indigenous communities. We're supporting the vital work of local community organizations that work day in and day out to provide young people with the opportunities they need to leave a life of crime behind. And the results are clear. Young people have the tools they need to succeed, and our communities are better for it. But this is only one part of our action to cut down on gun violence. We continue to fortify our strategic global partnerships while ensuring federal policing and public safety institutions remain effective, accountable, and financially responsible in a challenging and evolving environment. On a portfolio-wide basis, the total authorities sought in the main estimates will result in funding approvals of $16.7 billion for public safety portfolio for the 2026-27 fiscal year. Permettez-moi de souligner quelques points.
Allow me to point out some highlights.
Safety Canada, a total of $2.2 billion is sought in these estimates, which includes a funding increase for the First Nations and Inuit policing program of $38.2 million, along with $37.8 million increase to the First Nations and Inuit policing facilities program. These programs are fundamental to reconciliation and to improve the safety of Indigenous communities. Our government is continuing to invest in culturally responsive community-led policing services that are designed and governed in partnership with First Nations and Inuit communities. Funding supports both self-administered police services and tripartite agreements with a focus on officer recruitment and retention, training, equipment, and community trust. We have a responsibility to focus resources on core public safety outcomes. That's why we're ensuring that spending is targeted where it delivers the greatest impact, particularly in frontline services and high-risk areas. Canada Border Service Agency estimates include funding to deliver our government's commitment to hire 1,000 new CBSA officers, reinforce Canada's borders, enhance border integrity, and support the Land Border Crossing project. Similarly, the RCMP funding will expand the RCMP's federal policing workforce by 1,000 new dedicated personnel. The total funding sought is $6.3 billion, of which $263.9 million will support additional capacity for the federal mandate, and $173.3 million will support contract policing programs. For the Correctional Services of Canada, total funding sought is $4 billion, representing $138 million increase, mainly tied to operating expenditures and compensation due to collective agreement increases. For the Canada Security Intelligence Service, the total funding sought is $1 billion, which is an increase of $32.7 million over the previous year. These are all directed at improving the safety of communities across the country, at our borders, and in lockstep with our global allies. Again, portfolio-wide, these funding increases are offset by comprehensive expenditure review, measures to focus and streamline costs, ensuring responsible, efficient allocation of taxpayer funds. I look forward to working jointly with the United States and domestic partners to ensure border security and integrity while building our strategic and economic autonomy. We will continue to improve our ability to detect and respond to national security threats, as well as law enforcement's capacity to fight crime and protect communities. Je suis fier de travailler pour...
I'm proud to strive to fulfill these duties and to work alongside all of you to keep Canadians safe. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, which allows us to move over to MP Caputo, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Honourable Minister.
Through the chair, I will be directing all of my questions to the Minister of Public Safety. Thank you for appearing. Minister, will you extend the study on C-22, yes or no?
The study on C-22 is undertaken by the committee. As you're aware, Mr. Caputo, each committee controls its own agenda.
Well, then let's not.
So I would say that it is up to committee members to do that.
Will you recommend or advocate for that right here and right now? Yes or no? Here's your opportunity. Will you advocate for the committee to extend the study on C-22? It has been a disaster so far, if we're being honest. Will you extend the study for that reason? Will you advocate for the extension of that study, yes or no?
Mr. Caputo, I will leave it up to committee members to make that determination.
So you don't think we should be hearing from the National Council for Canadian Muslims? Is that right? Minister?
Mr. Caputo, I don't determine who appear witnesses. Those are priorities that you set and this committee set.
Well,
so I am not about to preempt any witness list.
Minister, let's not kid ourselves here. Minister, let's not kid ourselves. Your government has a majority. You can pretty well do whatever you want. Okay? So let's be clear. You could give the direction to your parliamentary secretary to ensure that more people are heard from Signal, NordVPN. You won't do that today. You won't advocate for the fact that we should hear from more witnesses. Do I have that right, Minister?
Mr. Caputo, I would say I would also question why any of this is, part of the main estimates conversation. I understand that you want to make some additional videos, and you're welcome to do that. But let me also say,
I have a face for radio, Minister. I'm not making any videos over this one. I'm asking questions on behalf of Canadians. This isn't about videos. This is about a bill that your government, in particular your department, has rolled out, and it has been an unmitigated disaster. It's been a disaster on communications, it's been a disaster on content, and it's been a disaster here in committee. So we don't need to talk about making videos. All I'm saying is this: you're the minister, the buck stops with you. Don't you think we should have more time to study this? Yes or no?
Mr. Caputo, you will see here that it's the portfolio agencies that are represented, not the members of our government or the chair. And I would say it is your prerogative as a committee to determine the timelines, and that is not on me.
That's a no. When are you releasing the MOU signed with China on matters of security and intelligence sharing?
Mr. Caputo, we've answered that question a number of times. I will say that as of 2010, we've had a number of very similar agreements that were entered into with China.
Was China designated as did we have a foreign interference inquiry in 2010? I'm just, my timelines must be off here, because things have certainly changed since 2010, Minister, and you and I both know that. Sam Cooper reported the reason this isn't being released is because China would have to sign off. Does China need to sign off on this, yes or no?
Mr. Caputo, we are following convention. So since 2010,
I don't care about 2010, Minister. I care about whether
Mr.
China
Caputo, if you want an answer, you need to give me some time to give you an answer.
You are answering questions I'm not asking, Minister. So I'm going to ask you this. Does China have to sign off on this MOU being released? That's it. Just a yes or a no, please.
The MOU in question is very similar to other MOUs that were signed since 2010, including by previous Prime Minister Stephen Harper. The convention has been that these documents are typically not released.
I'm not asking about conventions, Minister. Please stop answering questions I'm not asking. Does China need to sign off on this MOU being released? Yes or no?
This is our convention. This is
so
the practice.
The convention is for China to have to sign off.
This is the practice that Mr. Caputo, don't put words in my mouth, and let's not trivialize a very important issue that you're undertaking here. So
let's not.
The issue, let's not. So the MOU with China was entered into a number of times, including in 2010, under previous Prime Minister Stephen Harper. They have never been made public. And that continues to be the convention.
And there wasn't a foreign interference inquiry. We had members of parliament that lost their seats because of foreign interference. And that happened under your government's watch, Minister. So please don't lecture me about Stephen Harper and how things have changed. Does that MOU need China's sign-off to get released? Yes or no?
As I've said already, that is the prerogative of our government. And as convention dictates, we do not release the MOUs, whether it's China or other
Sam
countries,
Cooper got it wrong.
To the public.
Are you saying Sam Cooper got it wrong, that China doesn't need to sign off on that?
I have neither read his article or
I didn't ask if you've read
him.
it. His article says, or what he posted says, there has to be sign-off from Beijing. You have skirted around this. You can dance all you want, Minister. It's such a simple question, so I'm going to frame it so simply. Does Beijing need to sign off on this MOU being released, notwithstanding the prerogative, notwithstanding Stephen Harper? Does Beijing need to sign off, yes or no?
It is our government that needs to sign off, Mr. Caputo.
Oh, so your government won't be transparent with Canadians, is that right?
So let's not play games here. Okay, so this again,
let's get back to interrupt both of you, but that's all the time we have for this first intervention. Let me move now to Madame Dandurand for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us. I would like to remind my colleague, Mr. Caputo, that we do have a motion to have more witnesses heard on the topic and subject matter he put forward, so we would like to go forward with that motion. Honourable Minister, thank you for joining us here today again. And I would like to turn our conversation to an important topic, that of cellular connectivity. I'm from a region that's got a lot of mountains in it, very mountainous region, and I live in a city of around 200,000 people that is unable to receive web links, connections. All the rural communities around Sherbrooke, really many of them don't have cellular connectivity. I know that there are firemen, for example, who have to leave their own regions in order to make emergency calls, and sometimes accidents can't be flagged when they occur, and there are houses that are not connected. I would like to know more about this, how important it is to you, to the Minister of Public Safety and National Security, how important this type of connectivity is and what's being done to remediate the situation. Thank you, Ms. Dandurand. Let me first thank my colleague for these her questions. I know that you're a leader on this issue and that your work is really important to move us forward in this file, this essential file.
Pleasure of visiting your community, met with many leaders, civic leaders, including the fire chief. And I understood firsthand, I think, the complexity, especially around border towns with respect to not just rural connectivity, but also around confusion as to jurisdiction. And while I think border towns have always functioned, as good neighbors, whether it's on the U.S. side or on the Canadian side, it is often confusing, and connectivity is an essential issue. So I fully recognize the challenges, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank the several mayors as well as the fire chiefs that I met. I will say that the work continues. We need to ensure that rural communities are connected as part of the work of our Secretary of State. who continues to work on ensuring that all parts of Canada are connected, and especially in Quebec. And we will continue to work together to ensure that especially emergency services are well equipped with the resources that they need to be able to function in remote rural areas.
Merci beaucoup, et je pense que les...
Thank you very much, and I think that citizens in my region will be very happy to hear that you are concerned about the situation. The government is taking action, hoping that we will see effects soon. In the same line of business, you mentioned it, we are up against a border, and we know that there are budget restrictions, and sometimes the resources available for public safety are withdrawn from the regions before they're withdrawn from large cities. However, we have border crossings, land border crossings that are important ones. Same for my colleague's region, that of Ms. Bellefeuille. So how can we ensure that important border services are kept in the current portfolio?
And I'm going to ask if it's okay to ask President Gorman to comment as well. What I will say, it mirrors what our colleagues on the U.S. side do towards border control. The unique feature, I think, especially in your community, is that emergency services, for example, sometimes come in from the U.S. side. That can often be frustrating for community members, especially when it's an emergency. And we're very sympathetic to that, and something that we are working towards a solution. But maybe I can ask Madame O'Gorman to comment further.
Just
to reinforce that, we have agreements in place with our colleagues in the United States, our counterparts, for emergency services. As the Minister has said, we align our timing. It's difficult to have one land border crossing open and the other not. So this is very relevant work. And we also have agreements over and beyond that to ensure that in situations of exigent emergencies, services can cross easily from one side to the other. I think your question is about infrastructure as well. We do have investments, quite a considerable investment at the Lacal land border crossing, and smaller ones at smaller land border crossings. So we're ensuring that infrastructure is kept up and running, and that across the country. Unfortunately, that brings our time to an end. Ms. Dandurand, Ms. de Bellefeuille, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the Minister and to his team. I would like to bring up a topic that's very relevant to you, sir, human trafficking. I was very curious to see that the data regarding, gathered by Statistics Canada between 2009 and 2019, Quebec was in second for human trafficking, and from recently it is down to 4th place. So I looked into why this drop, and I found that since 2019, Statistics Canada is using the data from the Canadian emergency call line to counter human trafficking, as well as the cases that have been reported to police officers, to come up with a statistic. And something doesn't line up here. Minister, you received a report from the Quebec Coalition Countering Human Trafficking stating that Francophones in Quebec don't have an adequate quality and professional service when they use this emergency call line to report human trafficking. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Have you read the report?
I have not read the report, but I will say I am familiar with the situation. When I was, in fact, in
Excusez-moi, juste un instant, je vous avais demandé si...
I'm sorry, I asked if you had read the report, and you said you haven't read it, but you're aware of the issue. That's your answer. All right. I just want to say that the report, what it does say, and it's important for those listening to us, 90% of the calls, when people do call this line and they're Francophones, they are answered in English, and right after that, they try to send them to a subcontractor. Your group that you are covering for $12.5 million sends them to a subcontractor who doesn't understand when they answer Quebec accent, and so refers them to 811. So this group that you're funding, $12.5 million, isn't offering an adequate quality service at a professional level to Francophones who are dealing with this issue, with survivors or victims of human trafficking. What I'm asking here is, do you intend to investigate and to require of the group running this emergency line that they correct the situation? That's my first question. Second question, it would be easier, I think, to fund the Quebec coalition that counters human trafficking, have them offer 100% Francophone service with professionals and a network of resources that, they already know. And I can tell you, the subcontractor who answers in French, they're in Toronto. They don't understand and they don't know the resources available in Quebec. Will you undertake, Minister, to carry out these important changes so that Francophones in Quebec will have access to the same level of service of the same quality as Anglophones do?
Thank you, Madam. I will say I did have a roundtable when I was in Sherbrooke, probably in the fall, where we heard from those who are helping survivors and family members on the lack of French language services. It is something that has come to my attention. I wasn't familiar with this particular issue vis-a-vis provision of fluency in French, and something that I will certainly look into, and I will get back to you.
Je vais vous demander, Monsieur le Ministre, je vais vous remettre.
And I will ask you, Minister, and I'll provide you with a document which is in French. But look, I just want to say that the coalition met in last April, representatives of your department, and there has been no follow-up from them. Right now, this is not a light issue. This is about human trafficking. And at this point in time, as we're speaking, Francophones are being discriminated against. They're being brushed aside. It seems to me that with the report and the meeting on the 15th of April, this is already the end of May, I'm really very disappointed. And I would say that I'm even, quite upset about it. The way this Québécois coalition has been treated by your department. Do you undertake to quickly meet this coalition and to see to it that they be funded so that they too can offer an emergency call line on human trafficking offered in Quebec with a Quebec accent?
I'm very transparent in these things. I absolutely undertake to do that, and I would also look for your assistance as we meet them and to ensure that the appropriate services are extended.
Je vais vous dire sincèrement, avec le temps qui me reste, que
I can say quite sincerely that with the time left to me here, the group at issue, it's really well recognized in Quebec. It has a high level of expertise, and it really doesn't understand, why your department has just been so off the mark here. It would be so much simpler to have Francophones in Quebec helping people who are, a lot of them, let's put it clearly, in the Montreal region, because the funding that you're providing to the other group is allowing them to hire subcontractors that, speak some sort of French, but don't have the competency, professional competency or knowledge of the territory to intervene. They don't understand the media in Quebec. And I expect change. And a lot of people are listening to this. And this is really about human trafficking, not a light topic. So do you undertake, and does your department undertake, to make the changes necessary and provide funding to the Québécois group that takes care of human trafficking?
To look into this and to ensure that there's fairness. There's also undertaken to ensure that language of choice, particularly French, there's adequate and in fact, appropriate levels of French language fluency that is used in the delivery of these programs. That's the mandate that we have, and we certainly, in all of our agreements, we do have that built in, so we will certainly be able to speak to the provider and be more than glad to get back to you on this.
Merci beaucoup, Madame de Bellefeuille. Madame
Thank you very much, Ms. Bellefeuille. Ms. Kirkland, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, for being here today. My questions are for you. Initially, I'll be asking just a few, and I promise there's no tricks here. There's just a few yes/no questions as we start out. I think that you would agree that public trust is essential, right? When Parliament considers legislation affecting Canadians' privacy and digital communications, would you agree public trust is essential?
Look, my role, and especially I think
Is that a
that
yes?
of public
Come on.
safety.
Yes or
I don't
no?
do yes and no answers. Okay,
But
so if I may,
No, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you just for a second because it's really a simple question. Is public trust essential when we're making laws in this country that affect people's privacy and digital communications?
public trust is always important and essential.
Okay, perfect. Thank
in
you.
all the functions that I do as a minister.
Amazing. Would you also agree that trust can be undermined when Canadians are unclear about how their personal data might be accessed or protected under the law?
Trust certainly can be broken or challenged in a number of circumstances, including when misinformation is out there in social media, when basic issues are misconstrued, where things that are not in a particular bill, for example, are
just 1 second here.
espoused as being...
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry. I just want to get back to it because I agree with what you say about things being misrepresented, and I think that that's why time is essential. For people to understand something, they need time to process and time to absorb. So do you think that lawful access powers, for instance, like in Bill C-22, must always meet necessity and proportionality standards?
Look, I've spoken about the bill on a number of occasions, and I would say that the bill in front of this committee right now certainly attempts to balance, and I wouldn't say perfectly, but certainly attempts to balance a number of competing interests, and certainly any additional powers and authorities given to law enforcement is punctuated by ensuring that the privacy rights of individuals are protected, and there's actual judicial oversight and authorization in areas where.
I'll stop you there because that answers my question. Should Canadians have absolute clarity then about when and how their private communications can be accessed by the state? They should understand, correct?
Well, I think parliamentarians need to understand as well, and that's why we've taken a number of steps.
You don't think Canadians should have clarity?
Well, the first step is, I think, parliamentarians, but certainly Canadians also need to have that confidence and that trust.
Because I think you would agree that uncertainty, right? When there is any uncertainty in privacy law, that can be just as damaging as overreach, right? Uncertainty can be just as damaging as overreach because it changes how Canadians behave online. Would you agree with that?
Well, I will say that the lawful access bill that's in front of you has found the appropriate balance between protection of privacy rights, privacy interest. There's a reasonable expectation of privacy for all of us who are engaged or use electronic devices.
Okay, so I'll take back
that is a basic principle that we're working with.
Let me go back to what you said. You believe it strikes the proper balance. Yesterday, you criticized big tech companies, suggested they needed to step up in protecting Canadians' privacy rights, and that may be true. You even accused them of misinformation. But Apple, Google, Meta, Signal, civil liberty groups, privacy law experts, including the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, all testified that Bill C-22 could weaken encryption, create systemic vulnerabilities, and expose Canadians to greater cybersecurity threats, making our security even more at risk. So are all of those witnesses wrong, including the Privacy Commissioner?
What I will say is on encryption, Ms. Kirkland, let's not, what I've said on encryption is that we will be more than willing to look at amendments that strengthens encryption, that doesn't in any way compromise.
So this is more than just about encryption.
There's a number of things that you've put forward there. So with all due respect, it's not helpful for us to argue on points that I've already addressed, right? So, for example,
so
on
I
encryption.
understand this already, and I'm just trying to help Canadians understand it. So if you could just
on encryption,
be careful
let's
how you're responding back to me, because it feels a little bit like you're trying to. I've been studying this legislation. I understand it. Okay, so I don't want to accuse you of sounding a certain way. So we're just going to back up right there for a second. The Minister of Privacy Commissioner of Canada, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada testified, okay? He was here. He said Bill C-22 poses significant privacy risks and recommended narrowing the scope of the bill. Will you commit to doing that?
I'm sorry to interrupt. What could have been a useful answer? But that's all the time we've got for now. Madame Sodi, for 5 minutes, please.
Yes.
Minister, it's quite apparent that Conservatives like to ask questions, but they're not too interested in the answer. You did talk, and you seem to want to talk about the issue of encryption in C-22. I'll give you the opportunity to actually answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Pulaski. Look, I think I've made clear that, from the outset, Bill C-22 did have protection for, when somebody is asked to, when systemic vulnerabilities is at risk, there's certainly an ability of those who need to comply to be able to not comply with it in the name of systemic vulnerabilities, creating these vulnerabilities that will that could potentially impact the system's cybersecurity as a whole. What I will say is, on the issue of encryption, made it absolutely clear, and I did a number of interventions yesterday where I made it clear that we're willing to look and to have the appropriate language put in place, and I hope this is where the committee should work towards finding that right language. We may have a proposal. There may be a proposal from our colleagues on the other side. That is when I think the appropriate discussions need to take place as to what kind of safeguards need to be put in. There's no question. The intention was never to jeopardize encryption, and the commitment that we have today, that I've made clearly, is that encryption should not be compromised under any circumstances.
Thank you. Now I'll ask the questions I want to ask concerning my riding. I know Commissioner Larkin is here. Maybe this is more a question for him. There used to be something like 26 RCMP officers between White River and the Manitoba border. Was down to 2. I believe it's up to 3. We've heard a lot about 1,000 new RCMP officers, but I don't think Thunder Bay has yet to see more than 1, even though they're trying to increase the numbers beyond that. Can you give me some ideas to when we can hope to get some new RCMP officers?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. So the RCMP investment from the Government of Canada in the 1,000 is for the federal mandate, and you will see that those 750 regular members, which are police officers, supported by 250 public servants and/or specialized skills. The design is to deploy them across the country in our 4 federal policing regions, and so clearly Ontario is its own central region. It's a large landmass with significant national security work, supporting our colleagues at CBSA through border integrity, as well as serious organized crime, and those are rolling out right now. So we anticipate in the first year, by the end of the fiscal first year, to add 350 regular members across the country, and those are not centric to national headquarters. Those are centric to the regions doing federal policing, supporting the federal policing mandate. And so I recognize there is a detachment in Thunder Bay, and that staffing allocation is still internal discussion as we look at vulnerabilities not only in Ontario but across the country. So you will see a large infusion in the range of about 200 additional federal policing regular members in Central Region, and they'll be dispersed throughout the province of Ontario.
No, my other understanding was an impediment to getting officers in that region doing federal policing was the fact that a lot of places where they had contract policing, like on the prairies, the officer in charge had to sign off on somebody transferring. out of those regions, and they were refusing to allow officers in those places to move to other places. I think we had the head of the union of the RCMP here who said that was changing. Can you tell me, is that changed, or do we still have the problem or the situation where the officer in charge of groups of police across Canada can veto transfers?
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr. Chair. And so our releasability, which you're speaking to about, is releasability, and obviously we manage the releasability across our nation to ensure that every province and territory where we may be the provincial or territorial police service is not impacted, and create public safety in those communities where we provide support for provincial, territorial, municipal policing. What I can tell you is that the Commissioner has issued a federal policing releasability mandate, which directs all commanding officers across the country with set targets so that we can meet the RCMP 1000 and ensure that the federal policing program is a priority within our organization. And so each of the provinces and territories does have a signal around, here's your year 1, year 2, year 3 target, because the addition of the thousands over a 3-year period, and that ensures a balanced strategic approach to ensuring staffing across our nation without creating any gaps and or vulnerabilities in any community, which is important. We must ensure that our country is safe and secure. And so that's a very delicate balance, but I can tell you that we have a strategic approach around quarterly releasability, along with tied to a learning curriculum, a recruiting curriculum, which brings a very strategic focus to our organization.
Thank you, MP Perovski. Madame de Bellefeuille, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Now, Honourable Minister, we were speaking earlier about discrimination affecting Francophones compared to Anglophones, the emergency line to report human trafficking, but I've discovered another situation that's also worrisome. ITAC, or the Integrated Threat Assessment Centre, reporting to the Canada Security Intelligence Services, publishes little pamphlets like this, like threats to Canada linked to the situation in the Middle East, actually comes out with them quite often and puts them in Francophone CEGEPs in Quebec. And the Cégep de Jonquière has drawn my attention to this, saying, why aren't we receiving this in French, at least as many of them as we receive in English? And I'll read the answer we got, which to my mind is quite unacceptable. We are doing a good deal of effort to translate all our products as quickly as possible. Our evaluations often come out in response to current events, and to get them out quickly, we often send them out in English and then follow up with a French version. We don't send an email for the French versions, and if you go to our website regularly, you will see the French reports put up there regularly. If there's a specific report you're looking for, let me know. Now, reading that, Minister, I am furious. This is made to inform citizens about terrorist threats, and you're sending this out to Francophone CEGEPs. Most of the publications, 3/4 of them, are in English. And when we ask for them in French, we're told, well, we've got to get this out quickly. It's current news, and we haven't got translation services because, basically we write them in English, we publish them in English, we send them out in English, even to Francophone establishments. What's your response? I'm really upset.
And that I am a firm believer that Canadians should have material from the Government of Canada that is in the language, official language of their usage, and therefore I'm not familiar with this particular issue. So I will be more than glad to look into it, unless Ms. Giles is able to comment.
Malheureusement, il n'y aura pas de temps suffisant.
Unfortunately, there is insufficient time to do so, and we will move to MP Howell for 5 minutes.
Minister, I have some questions for you. They are simple questions, and I hope that I can get simple answers. So the first question I ask is, do you realize that shoplifting has become a national crisis?
Look, certainly when we talk about national crisis, Ms. Rao, then we have to be careful in the context.
Okay. So I think My second question. So do you know the annual losses caused by shoplifting? in the country?
I believe it's $6 billion a year. If I'm not
The answer
mistaken.
is 9.2 billion. Number 3, do you know how much losses from shoplifting have increased from 2019 to 2025?
I'm not familiar with that increase, no.
So it doubled from 5 billion to 9.2. Do you know how much an average grocery store has to spend on preventive measures and security each year?
Mr. Rao, I will say as a government, we are ensuring that the laws are in place to ensure
Okay,
that
the answer is
those-
5,000. So on an average, a grocery store has to spend $5,000 for preventives and security measures. Okay. Do you know the percentage increase in violence in reported shoplifting cases?
So, Mr. Rao, what I will say is I'm not an expert on shoplifting, okay, but I will say that I general issues around public safety, I can speak to what we as a government have been doing to address the issues of public safety. The concerns that you express are legitimate, and I will say that over the last year, we've taken a number of very important
Okay, I can give the answer. The increase is 76%. So do you know the percentage of retailers who feel unsafe in their workplace?
Again, I don't think this is helpful.
No.
Okay,
Okay,
I
the
don't
answer is
think you're-
47%. I will tell you why this is helpful, okay, at the end. Do you know that shoplifting is often related to drug use?
Sorry, I didn't understand your...
Do you know that shoplifting is often related to drug use?
It could be, yes.
Okay, great. Do you know that the same offenders are repeatedly arrested and released on the same day?
Again, Mr. Rao, I think if you want to speak broadly on public safety, I'm more than glad to give you some commentary as to the steps this government has been taking. What is not helpful, frankly, is like 20 questions.
Chance, okay.
20 questions to test my
two more.
knowledge.
Mr. Chair,
Two more.
point of order.
Yes, Madam Sodi?
With all due respect for my colleague, our minister is here today to answer questions. I don't think that it's fair to talk over each other. It's also not healthy for the interpreters that are doing the interpretation.
Okay, be patient.
If we could give him a chance to
Two more
answer.
questions, okay?
Thank you, MP Sodi. Ms. MP Ao?
So do you know the percentage of repeat offenders among those arrested for shoplifting?
Mr. Rao, I can give you a comprehensive answer in terms of what we as a government are doing to address the issues around crime.
So 18% is the answer. And the final question is, do you have a national strategy to deal with this shoplifting crisis?
I can say that Secretary of State Sahota has been involved and engaged on this issue. There was a discussion in Peel Region very recently. We're certainly open to looking at national strategy on a range of issues. But certainly, I would say overall issues around crime, we have Bill C-14, which strengthens bail as well as sentencing, Bill C-16, which is on victims' rights. We have Bill C-22, which speaks to lawful access, a tool that law enforcement have been asking for many, many years.
Now, I hope that you can come up with an effective strategy to deal with this growing problem. It hurts everybody in the country, because when there are losses in the money terms, it affects everybody in affordability, because the loss for the business will just be passed on to the customers. And also, when we have such a large number of retailers telling us that they don't feel safe in their workplace, I think we should be of concern. Now, actually, I've raised this question 4 weeks ago in the House, and I made a statement. And the fact that you are telling me that you're not aware of it, is perhaps, it was not being paid attention to. Maybe, I'm just a new MP. Nobody cares about, what I'm saying. But I would be surprised that you told me that, you are not aware of the problem. So I hope that this can be something that you can bring back to your government and work on.
With respect, I think the way you had framed it, I didn't agree with you that it's a national crisis. I think there is a number of issues that will take precedent over this on national crisis, including the national crisis on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals. The toxic drug crisis is a crisis. Certainly, issues around retail theft is an issue. It's certainly something that I'm concerned about, as are all Canadians, but it doesn't elevate to the level of a national crisis. So that's where I started off.
Organized retail crime. It's organized.
MP Howe? Sorry to interrupt. We'll now need to move to MP Housefather for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Minister, thank you for joining us today. This weekend on the streets of Montreal, there was a very disturbing rally where politicians were burned in effigy, including one who was visibly Jewish wearing a kippah. This was roundly denounced by the Mayor of Montreal and your Quebec counterpart, as well as yourself, Mr. Minister. Can you talk to us about why that type of action is unacceptable in Canadian society, and talk to me about some of the things that the government is doing to deal with the rampant anti-Semitism that has swept this country and the Western world?
So thank you, Mr. Housefather, for that question. And look, I've come to and met with your community a number of times. And I've had the opportunity to meet with Jewish communities in many parts of this country, including in Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Hamilton, Winnipeg, as well as Vancouver. The level of anti-Semitism is at its height, and it is. I wish it was under different circumstances, but you know, it is quite worrisome. We've been working with the law enforcement agencies, including ITAC, to ensure that appropriate updates are done, if required, on the security threat levels, which is essential. At the same time, we are investing in communities. So we have, in addition to the $10 million we announced a couple of months ago towards Jewish community security coordination, which is of paramount importance to us. We did announce $75 million towards funding over 5 years for places of gathering, including additional dollars towards security guards and so on, which is something the previous program did not allow. Having said that, Bill C-9 is an important tool that is going through the Senate right now, and again, it responds to some of the current issues that is faced within, you know, whether it be impeding place of worship or community centers. This issue is serious. The issue of anti-Semitism is serious. Hate is hate motivated, and oftentimes it's in the backdrop of other world incidents that are taking place. As a government, we're absolutely will stand with the Jewish community to ensure their safety and security. This is the resolve of the Prime Minister. There's a resolve of our government, but more work needs to be done. And all Canadians, I think, need to play a part in this as well. This is not, you know, when you attack the Jewish community, and I've heard this many times, you're not just attacking the Jewish community. You are attacking Canada. You're attacking all communities in Canada. I come from a minority community, and I would say that an attack on the Jewish community is an attack on all of us who have come to Canada, and my family came as refugees in search of a better place. And this is not acceptable, and our government will do everything we can to ensure the protection of Jewish Canadians, particularly the young people who need to grow up in a society where they can fully actualize their fullest potential.
Thank you. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair?
1 minute.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. You've been a tremendous ally in this. And one of the things that C-9 is the Combating Hate Act, for those people that don't speak in shorthand. And the Combating Hate Act is a really important tool. But one of the things that needs to be done when the Combating Hate Act gets through the Senate and gets royal assent is that we bring together the provincial public safety ministers, attorney generals, and police, and get proper training and proper guidance to all police forces across the country as to what is expected of police. I think one of the frustrations has been the feeling that police are not acting on the law. So, Mr. Minister, would you undertake to, after the law is adopted and royal assent is granted, to work with your provincial counterparts to move that forward?
Absolutely. It's part it'll be part of the FPT next time around. I do know that Deputy Commissioner Larkin has done a lot of work on this. RCMP meets with police leaders biweekly, and there's money that's going towards training as well. So, but there is more work to do, and I absolutely undertake to do that work.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, MP Housefather. Ms. MP Caputo, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, you earlier said that it is the prerogative of this government not to release the MOU with China, but you have not once said whether China would have to consent to the MOU being released, regardless of the prerogative. So I'm going to be very clear. I know you don't like yes or no answers, but I think that this is one of them. Notwithstanding any of that, does China have to approve releasing of the MOU? Yes or no?
Canada is a sovereign country. We make decisions in the best interest of Canada.
I didn't ask that, Minister.
Including disclosure of this
Minister,
said,
I'm not
MOU.
talking about Canada making decisions in its best interest. This is so clear, and you're obfuscating now. Frankly, you and I are both lawyers, and I think a judge might find us in contempt here if we were obfuscating this way.
MP Housefather.
Mr. Chair, I know you're not a lawyer, but that is a really serious allegation to say that the minister would be found in contempt by the judge. And I would just ask my friend, who's a really good lawyer, to not use that term.
Well, we're not getting, the minister wasn't all that offended. I think the minister takes my point. He would be found to be non-responsive. How about that? The minister would be non-responsive. So, Minister, please be responsive. I am not asking, I'm not trying to offend you, but I'm trying to drill down on this because this is darn important. You talk about Canada being a sovereign country. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about whether China has to approve the release, not Canada, not about sovereignty. Does China have to approve the release? Yes or no?
I will repeat that Canada is a sovereign country, Mr. Caputo.
So, Minister,
we will determine, based on convention, and that's what we've done here, whether to release the MOU or not.
What are you trying to hide here? What is the government trying to hide? Because you are not coming clean on this, Minister. You're not.
So let me be clear. Again, I've answered this question a dozen times. I will say, since 2010, we've had multiple MOUs on security with the Chinese government. They have never been made public,
and let me be clear, Minister.
Including, I will incidentally say, under Prime Minister Harper's
Did Stephen
leadership.
Harper call, you don't like yes or no questions, so I'll say this rhetorically because I won't get a yes or no. Did Stephen Harper call China our greatest security threat?
Well,
no, he did not. I'll answer it for you.
Well,
Did we have a foreign interference inquiry under Stephen Harper? No, I'll answer that for you. Transparency demands that this be released. People in this House, let me be clear, people in this chamber potentially lost their seats because of foreign interference. Your Prime Minister, who appointed you, who you answer to, said this is the greatest security threat, and within less than a year, he signs a secret memorandum of understanding with the very nation he said was the greatest threat to Canada. And then you come in here and you won't even tell us. You will not give a clear answer as to whether or not they have to sign off. I don't care about Canada. If it's only about Canada, that's even worse, because then you're not providing the transparency your government has promised. So what is it, Minister?
Mr. Caputo, let me just say that in the last year, significant world developments, and I don't want to insult your intelligence, have taken place where Canada needs to expand its trade relations. That is why trade relations.
Trade? This is about intelligence.
May I finish? May I finish? You had your time. Has to expand its trade relations. We are engaging in relations with a number of countries, including China. Having said that, the Chinese government does not dictate to us what documents are released and what are not. This is within the purview of the Canadian government, so I'm answering your question very clearly. It is in the purview of a sovereign Canadian government that has over many years, over 2 decades, of convention not to release these documents. So to answer your question with a yes or no, no, the Chinese government does not tell us or dictate to us or veto any release of these documents.
Okay, well, it took us 4 minutes to get there, unfortunately.
Are you good?
I'm sorry?
Fine,
no, please say it again. Say what you said.
It's all right, go ahead.
No, please. Let's hear it. Let's hear it, Minister. What did you have to say? No?
You got good clips, Mr. Caputo.
No,
so
I'm trying to
continue.
get answers for Canadians. If you don't want to give them, that's your prerogative. And with that in mind, I will be moving or giving notice of the following motion. That an order of the committee do issue for the government to produce the Memorandum of Understanding on Cooperation in Combating Crimes between the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Ministry of Public Security of the People's Republic of China, signed in January 2026, provided that the document be provided to the clerk of the committee in an unredacted format in both official languages within 10 days of the adoption of this motion.
Thank you.
This isn't about clips. This is about Canadians.
Thank you, MP Caputo. That's a notice of motion, which you will certainly share a printed document, which will then be translated and shared with other MPs, which then brings us to MP Sodi for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Minister, there were some questions in the last round that you weren't able to completely answer. Is there an answer of yours that you'd like to complete? I just want to give you a little bit of time to do that.
Let me just address the issues around Bill C-22, and if I may take the opportunity to ask the Senior Deputy Commissioner Larkin for some comments as well. Bill C-22 is a very important piece of legislation, and I do want to acknowledge the cooperation that we've generally had with the opposition, both the Conservatives and the Bloc. I'm grateful that we have had generally a collaborative approach. What is troubling, I think, right now, where we are right now, is as we move forward in this bill, there is a fair amount of noise. Those that are valid concerns are being addressed, and I do believe that through the committee process, we will address and strengthen the piece of legislation that's in front of you to ensure that we have a lawful access framework that works for law enforcement. At the same time, we have a system that protects privacy, extends privacy protections, and ensures that there's no backdoor or illicit ways for cyber criminals to have access to that data, and that is, we're very clear on that. So I do appreciate the work that this committee has been doing. I will, if with your permission, I'll ask Senior Deputy Commissioner to maybe highlight why C-22 is so important.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. It will come as no surprise to this committee that the RCMP and police leaders across the country are very supportive of Bill C-22, as well as a lawful access creation of a lawful access regime. We are the only Five Eyes country without a lawful access regime, and when you look at the larger G20 consortium of countries, we're also the only country not a part of that. For us, this is about victims. For us, this is about solving crime, and we believe that there's a balance of opportunities here between public privacy and I want to, and quite frankly, allowing lawful investigations. And I think that's the key. We're not asking for any unchecked police powers. What we're asking for is good governance, good democracy, and authorized, judicially authorized ability to investigate. I just want to highlight on the notion of encryption. Of course, the world has changed. And the reality is that we currently do have abilities to intercept and to deal with encryption, but the reality is that technology is changing at a greater rate than we can keep up with legislative reform. And you've likely heard from some of my colleagues in policing, including Commissioner Kariq, police leaders and police union executives have been trying to advance a lawful access framework since around 1996. And we've come close multiple times. We believe that the current climate, the geopolitical climate, is a tool that we need. We have significant national security investigations. We have significant serious organized crime investigations where encryption is at the heart of stymieing the prosecution and quite frankly, the undercurrent of solving those crimes. And so, again, it will come as no surprise to this committee that the RCMP, along with our policing partners and quite frankly, our colleagues from the service, are supportive of a regime that provides good governance, strong oversight to ensure that there is no unchecked and quite frankly puts the privacy of Canadian citizens, but doesn't override those that commit the crimes, those individuals that perpetrate on children, perpetrate on drug trafficking, perpetrate on illicit firearm trafficking. The tools for us are required within C-22 for us to be a modernized police community in Canada.
For your answer. Minister, we heard from Peel Regional Police on Tuesday about the importance of Bill C-22, which you just reiterated, in completing their work. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition stated that Bill C-22 will give the Liberal government sweeping surveillance powers over information of Canadians. Would you like to comment on this statement?
Sure, it's categorically false, and that's why I think discussion on Bill C-22, especially amongst all of us as parliamentarians, needs to be in a responsible manner, in a way that doesn't propagate misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
This is about, again, victims, as the Senior Deputy Commissioner said. It's about supporting victims. Peel Regional Police in their press conference, and kudos to Chief Nation and Deputy Chief as well, and the whole team. They indicated that the arrest could have been made much sooner had lawful access framework been available. A lot of time took place, especially cross-border investigation involving a number of police jurisdictions. It took a long time for them to get the warrants and the production orders in order to fully investigate before the charges were made. And in the meantime, poor victims in Peel have been struggling with issues of extortion, something that I know you're very familiar with, and you've done great work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, MP Sodi. That's all the time we have now. Donc, je vais terminer en vous remerciant, Monsieur le Ministre.
So I will wind up with thanks to you, Honourable Minister, for your presence, your appearing here, and all the time that you and your team put in to preparing to see us. We wish you a good day, and we suspend. Welcome back to our meeting, and we will continue. We have with us several government officials, and I will name them quickly from the Canada Border Services Agency. Aaron O'Gorman, who is the president, Ryan Pilgrim, Vice President, Finances, and from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, we have Nicole Giles, or Gilles, I'm not sure, who is Deputy Director, Policy, and Jérôme Laliberté, Deputy Director, Administration from Correctional Services of Canada, Jake Pike, Assistant Commissioner from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Karine Paré, Assistant Deputy Minister, and John McKinley, Controller and Assistant to the Chief Financial Officer. From the Parole Board of Canada, we have Claudine Legault, Principal Finance, and from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Brian Locken, Senior Deputy Commissioner, and Sayan Gunla, who is the Chief Financial Officer. And we will now go to our MP's questions. 6 minutes from MP Caputo.
Deputy Commissioner Larkin, I just literally, my staff just sent me something here, so I do have to ask you about this. And this is from a Global Story posted May 21, 2026. Now, you were here for the minister's remarks, Deputy Commissioner, so you heard when he said that the release of the MOU was the sole prerogative of the government. Now, I'm reading a Global Story by Sean Boynton, May 21, 2026. I haven't even gotten to the end of it yet. This is what it says. First paragraph, the RCMP says it won't release the full agreement it signed with China's Ministry of Public Safety without Beijing agreeing to do so, despite demands from the federal Conservatives and NDP for answers on what it contains. That was 7 days ago. I know I'm putting you in a very difficult position here, Deputy Commissioner, in asking you about the RCMP's position on this. And if we need to suspend for a few seconds so you can read the story, I'm happy to do that as long as we extend, because this is pretty important. We just had the minister tell us it's the government's prerogative and it has nothing to do with China. The story goes on to say the RCMP will not unilaterally make public or share, this is in a quote, the contents of an MOU with a third party without the concurrence of the other party. As such, the RCMP is not releasing the contents of the MOU at this time. So clearly the RCMP's viewpoint is that it needs the how shall I say, agreement of a third party. The statement, this is what the story says, the statement added that such agreements are a very common practice between national law enforcement agencies seeking new or enhanced cooperation, and the RCMP has many MOUs in place with agencies around the world. And then it goes on to say, while this is not a quote, while the full text of many of those MOUs that were signed with China has been released, the one with China's Ministry of Public Security has not. I wish I had seen this before when we could have asked the minister about that. I understand that you're probably in a terribly difficult position because you haven't seen this. Are you able to comment on this at all, Deputy Commissioner?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair, I can certainly, speak to it from an RCMP perspective. As this committee and as you'll be aware, Mr. Caputo, I have significant knowledge of that MOU, and I'm happy to provide larger context, around the purpose and how the RCMP engage in MOUs with many different law enforcement agencies across the country. It would be our organizational position that we obviously, in the respect of our partnership with the Ministry of Public Security in China and with our partners, and in the approach to good collaboration, good work with another law enforcement agency, That generally, it's not our position to release the RCMP. It's not our position to release MOUs without third-party consent. That being said, is that the RCMP commissioner can, and at the direction of the Minister of Public Safety, can be directed to release MOUs, et cetera, at the purview of the government. And so our perspective, and that article, although not familiar or likely have seen that article, but obviously familiar with the media response and obviously the response to many different journalists in relation to that, is that it's our position that the RCMP commissioner and myself here as his delegate, we would not be in have the authority and or the ability to release it without consulting with our partners from the Ministry of Public Security in China. Again, obviously we take ministerial direction, and that would be within the purview of the Government of Canada. But specifically for the RCMP commissioner, that would be our position, is that third-party consent is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I have your point. And again, I put you on the spot with a tough question, so I appreciate you giving something very quickly here. Is there anything classified in the MOU? Like, is there anything intelligence related in the MOU?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. This is an agreement. It's a renewal of agreement. As the committee is aware, it really opens the door for collaboration. It's not legally binding. There's no enforceable conditions in there. It doesn't compel information sharing. It doesn't override any of our Canadian laws or police approaches. What it does is it actually creates an opportunity around information sharing, particularly around precursors, fentanyl investigations, how those investigations are conducted. And in short, in my opinion, there's nothing that is classified in there. It's a very standard memorandum of understanding that we have with many different countries as we roll through there. I mean, again, it's certainly one that creates the ability for the RCMP to work with a law enforcement agency on how we conduct mutual investigations, how we conduct the information sharing. Those are the general thematics. It also covers,
Sorry, I'm nearly out of time. I guess I'll leave you with this rhetorically. I don't understand why we would not release something that is as commonplace, bland, as you just described. Why would the government not release it? I know you can't answer that, but this really
désolé du retard.
So, welcome back. So sorry about that delay. We had a sound issue, a major one, and wanted to ensure that the interpreters were capable of working with us again. So we were at the very outset of MP Ramsey's intervention. Everyone has forgotten what you were saying, so I'll ask you to start at 6 minutes, sir. Well, that's nothing new there that I should be forgotten. But I will go to Mr. Pike first this time. That will be a little more logical. Mr. Pike, when I have visited prisons, I have met many programming agents, probation agents as well, probation officers who are concerned. And I would like to hear you on whether in the upcoming year's budget there will be amounts, more or less, for programs and for probation officers.
Question. We always have funding. Sorry, I'm not being facetious, but obviously always have funding associated with programming and interventions across all sites. I would say in terms of dedicated resource indicators, we do have resource indicators based on population indicators for ratio of program officers to offender population, correctional program officers, same thing. There is discussion, obviously, through comprehensive expenditure review in looking at the structure of correctional programming and parole overall. There are some reductions to correctional program officers that will coincide with a new model. We've had preliminary discussions with the union to this point in terms of what that new model will look like, and so there will be some reductions to correctional program officers moving forward. There will be more support to take care of a lot of the administrative pieces that some of the correctional program officers are seized with right now, to allow them to do the actual work of delivering programs. So and we have had those discussions to this point with USJE, who's the union representing those members.
Alors, je vous encourage, oui, effectivement, parce que une des...
So I would encourage you to continue to work with these groups, because we hear a complaint to the effect that there's a lot of extra time having to put in to manage the paperwork and so on. So I think that if correctional program officers or probation officers could be freed up to do more of their direct work, that would be helpful. Ms. Legault, back to you. I was saying that our colleagues on the other side of the House often accuse you when there is the parole board liberates someone and accuses the government of being the very source of that parole. I'd like to hear you again explain to our colleagues that the Parole Board of Canada is independent and impartial. I would also like you to tell us whether the budget you will now have will allow you to continue to offer quality work, and I congratulate you on doing so. And if you or your commissioners have noticed any gaps in the information needed to probation officers and correctional program officers to continue working with you.
Pour ce qui est des agents pour le budget, en fait, nous, qu'est-ce qu'on donne comme budget? C'est pour s'assurer qu'il y ait une livraison des services et des décisions pour les commissaires. Donc, on protège le mandat de cette façon.
We have a budget to ensure that the program correctional officers have the information they need to deliver the programming. And we're up and running. Thank you. All right. So the commissioners do indeed make decisions that are independent. It's a quasi-traditional arm's-length parole board. And regarding anything about any inmates, it's really independent. And our budget is independent and ensures that that mandate is protected. We will be facing cuts in the next couple of years with the budget cuts, but we have ensured that there is enough funding for those who must make decisions. As for our interactions with the probation officers and commissioners, I'm not personally aware of the complaints that have been lodged. We can come back to you with information on that. Thank you. That would be much appreciated. It would be nice to know whether this is sort of a general issue, of course, not on a personal or individual level, but we'd like to know in general whether the commissioners feel that they can carry out their work to their full extent. Ms. Gills, we have still not quite heard how you pronounce your name. It's Giles. Very good. Thank you. Ms. Giles. We know that the nature of the threats, the kinds of threats against Canada are changing in frequency, intensity, and nature. I would like to know whether you intend to shift your use of funding in the coming year to face them better and over the next year, and if so, perhaps tell us as much as you can about that. Thank you. It's a very good question. I will answer in English just to ensure that I can give you a very detailed response.
Threats are materializing both in terms of the increase of the volume, the variety, as well as the velocity of the threats. So what that means is that we're having to combat and address a whole series of threats, both traditional ones when it comes to espionage or sabotage or foreign interference, but also ones that are new in terms of the types of ideologically motivated violent extremism we're seeing. The other challenge we're facing is that technological advances are leading to the threats manifesting much faster than they previously did, which means that the threat can move from idea to action much more rapidly. So from somebody sitting at a keyboard moving to actually moving from the ideation to the actual attempts to perpetrate the threat. So where that leaves us as Canada's Security Intelligence Service is that we are constantly reprioritizing to address the most urgent and serious threats that are facing Canada based on the funding that we receive. And so we're regularly reallocating according to the threat environment. We're regularly reallocating in accordance to the work that we're doing with our domestic and international partners. The reality is that we are requiring more intelligence and more security intelligence than ever before. But we are sure that Canadians can expect that we will continue to protect them to the very best of our ability.
Merci beaucoup. Dernière question peut-être.
Thank you very much. A last question, perhaps for Mr. McCrory. We heard the Commissioner Larkin tell us that the RCMP is in the process of successfully hiring the 1,000 people that it proposes to hire then over the next few years. I'd like to hear you whether you are doing the same at the Canada Border Services Agency, if you're as optimistic. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question.
Because we're going to use numbers, and it'll be better for me to say it in English. Yeah, I think we're on track.
Okay, sorry, I was confused. My clock. I thought my clock was decreasing, was increasing. So I apologize for interrupting you rudely, but that's well over the time allocated for MP Ramsey, which gives me the opportunity. Passe la parole, Madame de Bellefeuille, pour 6 minutes.
Of moving to you, Mr. Bellefeuille, for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Ms. Giles. Could you confirm that the Integrated Center for Threat Evaluation, an organization that reports to your CSIS and thus essentially reports to the Department of Public Safety and National Security, is that correct? Thank you for the question. I want to be sure. You're asking about ITAC. Is ITAC under our supervision? It's not supervised directly by myself, but the director of CSIS, yes. So at CSIS, is it important to respect the Official Languages Act? Yes, of course. I spoke to the minister during the first hour about CJEPs, Francophone CJEPs in Quebec, receiving quite regularly an information flyer from ITEC about threats in Canada or affecting Canadians, to inform them in real time about any threats so that CJEPs would be aware of them. It's like a little flyer like this that comes in rather often. And I told the minister that I was very upset because I had seen a response from an employee to the effect that, look, we're very sorry, we're not able to send out these bulletins in both in English and French. We haven't capacity to do that. But look, if you're interested, please check our website because they will wind up there. Do you think that this is respectful of your mandate, being to protect Quebecers and Canadians, if you're treating Francophones and Anglophones differently? Mr. Chair, it's of great importance at CSIS that we communicate in both official languages of the country.
Communicate with all of Canadians to the extent that we can in the language of their choice, which is why we also translate documents into other languages that are used in Canada, including some Indigenous languages. Under the Official Languages Act, our employees are able to write in the language of their choice. So they'll write their assessments in English. They'll sometimes write their assessments in French. I would guess that the majority are in English.
No, I'll interrupt you with all due respect. Basically, this is about a publication which is sent to the CJEPs in Quebec, including Jonquière CJEP, which is my specific example, where, you know, in the same package, they'll have one document in French and 4 or 5 in English. And the CJEP says, well, why am I getting the same amount of information and at the same time in French? And the answer is, well, we can't give that to you because we haven't the capacity to do that quickly in real time. And I think that, Ms. Giles, this is an unacceptable response because your aim is to protect Francophones, Anglophones, and in fact, everyone living in Canada. And you are providing information, more information, and of better quality to Anglophones than to Francophones. That's unacceptable given all the means we now have to get documents translated. We have a translation bureau that's overworked, but you do have means within CSIS, and especially given that your mandate is to protect and that, you know, communication counts. I would like to know, because we have evidence here. I'm not a police officer. I'm just a, you know, I work in the healthcare service. At least I used to do that. But we know that when you're in an emergency situation with information not in your language, it's a real barrier to adequate protection. So I'd like to know, you know, now everyone knows that this is the case. And what will you do to correct this such that in future educational establishments or any other Francophone partner is able to receive the same quantity and quality of documents from ITEC, DCIEM in French? What will you do about this? Mr. Chair, I'm in full agreement that it's very important that the information be provided to all Canadians in the language of their choice. I fully agree.
The particular correspondence, my firm commitment to the committee is that I will take that information, I will look into it, and I will do whatever we can to ensure that the language of choice is respected when we're sending out documents. I'm unfortunately not aware of the particular correspondence in this particular case, but CSIS's commitment is to ensure that we follow the Official Languages Act, and wherever possible, we are putting out in both official languages.
I'm very happy to hear you make this commitment, but it will require an organizational change because this isn't just some sort of allegation or what if, it's a real fact. And it's as though CSIS were to say that the safety of Francophones, their ability to protect themselves from terrorist threats, is less important than that for other Canadians. So I expect important and considerable changes in your system to ensure that Francophones receive the same quantity and quality of information about terrorism in Canada as do Anglophones. Do you undertake to do that? I fully agree that it's very important to ensure that information on threats be provided to our Francophone partners. It's essential that we protect all Canadians similarly. And you have a very, my assurance that this is a commitment at CSIS, and I will take this information, return to my organization, and verify to ensure that information is provided in both official languages. Thank you, Mr. Bedfay. Ms. Cronus, you have 5 minutes.
Given that I was a bit too generous to the previous Liberal speaker.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Chair. And my questions are going to be for Ms. Giles as well. Most Canadians are familiar at this point with foreign interference in our elections. And I sit on the Human Rights Subcommittee of Foreign Affairs, and we've been studying transnational repression where, as you know, foreign governments target people often from their own diaspora communities, but sometimes Canadians who support those diaspora communities and others. Online and in other places, and you were talking about the additional threats that we are facing in terms of volume, nature, velocity, and you also talked a lot about the technical implications. And I want to apply that to our discussions about Bill C-22. Issues around end-to-end encryption have come to this committee in relation to the bill. And I'd like to get your thoughts. Is it fair to say that Canadians who are the subjects of transnational repression in Canada are very dependent on communications mechanisms that have strong end-to-end encryption?
Mr. Chair, I think that's a really important question. I think that when it comes to religious, cultural, and ethnic communities that are in Canada that have strong roots in other countries around the world, that a number of means of communication are used. The reality is that so many of the publicly available email systems, messaging systems that are used do have encryption built into them. And so I think from there it's fair to assume that most Canadians and people in Canada do rely upon different forms of communication which may or may not have encryption.
And is it fair to say that those who are being targeted by foreign regimes would face, in some cases, serious personal danger if some of the secure communications mechanisms that they depend on are compromised?
I think, Mr. Chair, I think that when it comes to the threats that individuals are facing in Canada, it can come through a variety of mechanisms. I think that when it comes to foreign interference being perpetrated in Canada, if there are foreign states that are trying to interfere in a deceptive or covert way with the communications of Canadians and to use that information to bring them harm, that is certainly something that would be a priority for CSIS to examine and to ensure that we're able to work with our domestic partners to combat it.
Well, and as we know, these are not hypothetical threats. There are people, there have literally been murders in the last year that have been linked to this kind of foreign interference and transnational repression. So what I'm wondering is whether the government's conducted any threat assessments specifically examining how lawful access capability requirements could affect communities that are vulnerable to transnational repression and those who CSIS is helping in this regard.
Mr. Chair, I think that's, again, a really excellent observation and an excellent question. What we have done in our examination of the work on Bill C-22 is tried to understand where it is that there are gaps in our lawful access system and where plugging those gaps and bringing our lawful access framework up to the standards of our allies, including European allies and Five Eyes allies, where that would allow us to better protect Canadians, including from transnational repression. And we believe that having a lawful access regime will better enable us to protect victims of foreign interference and transnational repression in Canada, as well as a number of other threats.
But sometimes when we're trying to help people, we inadvertently have unintended consequences of that. And so I'm asking about the other implications of it. The idea, the possibility, whether or not the assessments included the possibility that weakened encryption standards, that the requirement to have backdoors that could be exploited by foreign actors looking to do Canadians harm.
So, Mr. Chair, I can be very clear that there is no expectation and no requirement, certainly, for backdoors to be put in place through Bill C-22. There is not to be any systemic vulnerabilities that are introduced as part of Part T2 of Bill C-22. And if service providers are concerned about those systemic vulnerabilities, they are able to avail themselves of a number of various steps, including up to judicial review, to challenge that.
With all due respect, judicial review is too late when somebody's come up to your doorstep and put a bullet through your front door. The issue that I'm asking about is we've had a number of experts at this committee who have come and have made it clear that despite the intentions of this bill, there is the reality that that encryption could be weakened, and the minister himself has indicated that he is willing to accept amendments on this to get it right. I'm asking you, from a safety and security perspective, is it important that we get it right?
Mr. Chair, from CSIS's perspective, it's always important that the legislation that's put in place is there to protect Canadians. The parliamentary process always involves quite a bit of back and forth as Parliament works in the best interest of Canadians to ensure that we have the best possible legislation. I think the minister has expressed his interest in amendments, and we'll certainly support that.
The question I'm asking you is not about whether or not you believe we've struck the right balance. The question is if we get this wrong, in the context of the velocity, the volume, and the nature, and the changing technology that's out there, is it important to get this right to make sure that people's lives are not at risk?
Mr. Chair, it's always important to ensure that we get the legislation right, and having a proper lawful access regime in place will ensure that we can better protect Canadians.
Thank you very much for this intervention. Madame la députée Dandurand pour 5 minutes.
Ms. MP Dandurand, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presence. You will know that I often speak of problems faced by regions outside the large urban centres because we need resources too. And let me bring up Sherbrooke, where we have a lot of transition houses, transition homes for people who are on parole, for example. I would like to know whether we have sufficient resources to support young people who have been in correctional systems and are now being released, and how can we support municipalities that try to take responsibilities for these people once they're in the community?
So in terms of capacity, or increasing our CBRF, our halfway house or community partner capacity in terms of that piece. Sorry, you lost me with the youth piece because I don't deal with youth, but I understand you mean the succession of youth into our facilities, right?
Probably lost in translation. I was asking about regions. How can we help municipalities who have transition centers? I don't know if it's the good term in English.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, sorry. I understood you.
Do we have the resources to help municipalities that receive those people? Those people need help, obviously. So, how do we help municipalities with those situations?
Yes. Thank you. Merci pour préciser, Madame. We work collectively. We have halfway house associations that exist across each province, across each region and district. So we will work with our community partners in terms of looking at expansion options, or some may put forward project suggestions, for capacity or to increase capacity or programming. We'll work in collaboration with those partners in the community to try to increase that capacity to meet the demands of what we have coming out. In fact, we have done this across the country. I come from a region myself, a couple of regions to be candid, and it's always a challenge. A lot of it is balancing expectation with what we have. So, the other dynamic, and particularly in community, is their ability to expand capacity as well, because as we know, putting these facilities into community areas is not always popular. Lots of engagement with the community and local police and the community to be able to expand. I can openly say that with an increasing offender population, we are seeing increasing pressure in terms of community bed space and community programming. Funding at this point, not a concern for the CSC in relation to funding our programs and maintaining a safe reintegration, to full extent, but always working with community partners in terms of how do we expand. It depends on the region as well, or the area of the region, because obviously in high urban built-up areas we have a big demand. It's equally challenging in some of the smaller localities, right, depending on the specifics of the case. But we're certainly working on specialized beds in relation to substance use and continuing that care, or continuum into the community from that. Same with aging. We have an aging offender population. I know you were speaking of youth and coming through the system, but the reality of it is we have to match specialized beds inside with specialized community support outside, and that's a focus of ours as well.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And I will move to a different topic, security at the border. The threats are now more complex at the border, drug traffic, firearms, clandestine entry, and we need to cooperate well with our international partners, including our American partners, especially in my region, which is along the border with the United States. So how do the main estimates provide sufficient monies to improve work at the border?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, pour la question. I think, yes, the threats and challenges are constantly evolving, and how we try to allocate our resources is based on risk. And so where that risk is emerging or where it's changing, we will reallocate our resources accordingly. And so the main estimates are providing funding for us to continue that work, but it also includes the funding for the 1,000 officers. So that, in particular, the 1,000 officers are going to be allocated in areas where we've identified threats and risks that need to be addressed, primarily along in terms of our uniformed staff at the border, but also inland as well. So we'll have people working on removals or inland investigation, as well as people doing security screening.
Merci. Et comment ça fonctionne la course?
Unfortunately, this brings your time to an end, Mr. Bedfay. You now have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for you, Commissioner. The chair, whom we appreciate greatly, has tabled our first study in Parliament yesterday on managing the border and ports of entry, but I'm not sure whether you've been able to look at it, but it includes a series of recommendations. There are two of particular interest to me, and I'd like to know what you think of them. I am also, like Ms. Dandirand, an MP of an area along the border, and we have an RCMP post there. They work very, very well with local partners, police officers, and community groups, and they have set up a satellite post to carry out interviews, for example, and also to keep various equipment, quick intervention equipment, four-wheelers and things like this to help them in an emergency situation. Another recommendation that we had is for small rural communities, when there are immigrants entering illegally, we call on the emergency services of the small municipality that we're in, and that's very onerous. And we suggest that a budget be provided to the small municipalities that help the RCMP in this way. Two recommendations are intended for the RCMP and its budgeting, and I know that you are working on your department's budget. Do you think that that's favorable and helpful, that those two suggestions, will they help you continue to manage our borders appropriately? 45 seconds.
Mr. Chair, the RCMP was very grateful to be the recipient of funding to help secure our border as a part of the Fall Economic Statement in 2024. So $1.3 billion in border security package was provided to the entire portfolio.
Mais les postes satellites ruraux aux frontières.
Right, but satellite rural positions at the borders. Is that something that you now have in your budgetary planning? Will you get funding specifically for them?
The onboarding of the 1,000 new personnel for the RCMP, the majority of that personnel will be located outside of the National Capital Region.
Vous ne répondez pas du tout à ma question. Je vous parle de postes sanitaires.
Okay, you're not answering my question. I'm asking about these satellite posts. I'm not asking about personnel.
All I could share is that there will be an increase in RCMP resources to support our federal mandate, including those to support our border protection. And we anticipate that there will be just under 200 more personnel located in the eastern region, which encompasses the province of Quebec and the Maritime provinces.
Merci. Je vous ai laissé un petit peu plus de temps pour être un...
Thank you. I left a little more time to try to balance out the MPs of the other two parties. And now we move to MP Au. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Questions for Mr. Larkin. Earlier on, when we talk about the MOU between China and Canada on policing cooperation, you mentioned 3 things. Number 1, you said that it's general. Number 2, you said that this is similar to the previous MOUs. And number 3, you mentioned about addressing the fentanyl crisis. Now, and I find that to be very interesting because from experience, we know that in the past years, the previous MOU has not been effective in stopping the influx of fentanyl into Canada. So if that's the case, why would we sign it again, an ineffective MOU this time, and expect that it would bring a different result?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Focus on a couple of broad comments around this is that, the RCMP was interested in continuing to renew the MOU around ongoing transnational threats, which include, obviously, drug trafficking, the importation of fentanyl, which we work very closely with our CBSA partners, but also addressing, again, threats of foreign actor interference, criminal activity, serious organized crime, and these threats, quite frankly, require the RCMP to engage with other law enforcement agencies globally, including the Ministry of Public Security in China. We do have officers located across the Indo-Pacific and liaison officers that work with all agencies. And again, the reality is that the engagement and/or participation in these memorandum of understandings should not be mistaken for any endorsement of other countries' conduct. I think that that's really important. The reality is, though, is that we have a responsibility as a police agency to work with all partners, and that at times includes, countries that we may not, in fact, endorse and/or support the way they operate. But we have a responsibility. We have obviously Canadians who travel. We have Canadians who go through those countries, including the Republic of China. And so the MOU was designed to re-engage dialogue because it had been stagnant for some time. Our relationship had, quite frankly, been quiet. There had not been much engagement from our organization and the Ministry of Public Security, and it was an opportunity to once again engage in ongoing dialogue, renewing that dialogue, looking at opportunities. Again, I would concur that the addiction and fentanyl challenges in our country remain at the forefront, and we're doing significant work with all police services to conduct large-scale investigations.
That a few more areas, right, on top of the fentanyl. You mentioned about foreign interference, and other kinds of security concerns. Now, do you agree that, judging from the past experience, that MOU has not been effective? And you also mentioned the word dialogue. So are you saying that these MOUs are serving a purpose only on engagement and dialogue? There's nothing in the MOU or in the cooperation that could actually be effective in helping our country to become safer?
Well, thank you for the question. And I guess, do we have a matrix that measures the success of the MOU? No, we don't have a matrix. That being said, this one was renewed recently. The Commissioner has engaged in dialogue at the United Nations Police Week in New York City with leaders from the Ministry of Public Security, intends to do so in the coming months again to reopen doors around some of the challenges we're facing. And so we do work very closely. We track, for example, precursors that come into our country, and obviously trying to engage law enforcement in the Republic of China to assist us, to get information. Those are things that we do on a regular basis. And so, again, I do want to be clear that we don't have a matrix on success. And I've been, I think, very clear that, the relationship had been mute. And so this is about re-engaging and starting that. And again, I want to be very clear. This is not an endorsement of the particular country, but there's work to be done from a law enforcement perspective. And regardless of the challenges, we need to work through those for the safety of our country and the safety of our citizens. And that's incumbent upon us as part of our fiduciary responsibility.
Okay, again, so in order to make our country safer, so what kind of guarantee that we have to seek from our partners in terms of being regarding the implementation or all kinds of measures that have to put into place to make it work? Again, I don't want people to have the false expectation based on a useless MOU. So what kind of guarantees are we seeking in order to make this kind of protection effective?
Well, thank you. In a general term, I don't think that we go into any guarantee when we enter with an MOU with any law enforcement agency globally. There are no guarantees. There's no performance outcomes or matrices in those MOUs. The purpose of them is to actually create a framework and a regulatory opportunity for us to how we share information, how we can work collaboratively. At times there's around cost recovery in those MOUs. It's how we use the information. That's what it's designed to do. There's a broader perspective here. I don't think that any MOU that our organization has with any law enforcement agency has an outcome or a guarantee.
So my
that will
question is,
improve
why
safety.
not make one step further than the MOU?
I have
That's
to
my
cut you off
question.
because we're well over time. Thank you, MP Ramsey, for 5 minutes, please.
Alors, lorsque nous avons été interrompus, Monsieur McQuarrie.
When we were interrupted, Mr. McCrory, you were answering my question. So what's the plan for Canada Border Services Agency to train the 1,000 new resources, new staff members? It must. And do you have the funds to do so in the year to come? Do you have the physical resources and means, the schools to do so? And as a secondary question, what's your plan for positioning, assigning those 1,000 people? Have you already decided where they will be posted, and what proportion will go to the land ports of entry, the airport entry points or ports, and so on and so forth, and even covering intelligence?
Mr. Chair, yes, we're on track to hire our 1,000 officers by the end of, our target is by the end of fiscal year 2028-29. As of May 8th, we've actually have over 100 of the 1,000 new officers in place. 200 will be in training at the College in Rigaud by July 2026. And in terms of your question of the infrastructure, our college at Rigaud, the management there is looked both at our attrition and the need to bring in new staff to meet that commitment for the 1,000. That is part of what they're doing. That is what their plan is. So we're well on track to do that. In terms of the allocation, about 800 of the officers will be uniformed officers that will be allocated at points of entry, for example, so at the land border, marine ports, rail facilities. The exact disposition we're working through as staff come on, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll be doing that on our threat or a risk basis where they're most needed. The other 200, roughly other 200, are also I describe as operational staff, and they'll be brought on as well, and we've started to assign them. So, for example, in my particular organization, I'll have some staff that are assigned to doing security screening. In the broader program that I'm responsible for, we'll have criminal investigators, and we'll have people doing inland investigations. So those staff are coming on board, and we're on track to have to meet our commitments.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Pike.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pike. Drones.
L'interception des marchandises illégales à travers de nos...
Intercepting illegal merchandise. When we visit the prisons, we hear a lot about this. I think it takes a lot of resources to handle this. It costs a lot. What are the plans that you have at Correctional Services of Canada? Do you have strategies by establishment, or do you have an overall strategy? I'd like to hear you on this.
Yes, we have an overall strategy. Every site has drone detection systems right now. The issue with us, it's one thing to detect a drone, it's another thing to interdict in the sense of being able to stop the payload from coming in. So we have now introduced new technology in terms of drone mitigation by intercept of the signal. So we just finished our first pilot site in Ontario. Next site is in Quebec to move forward with the ability to actually prevent drones from entering our airspace, which will stop the payloads, drops, and the like. There's another piece to it, too, with the technology. We have to constantly be updating. Typically you might have radio frequency drones as an example. Now we're seeing more GPS waypoint cellular drones. So we're ever involving the technology. I am very happy to report that from the spring economic update, we have received $60.4 million, all of which will be towards drone mitigation, cellular mitigation for this very purpose. It's the number one thing we're seized with in terms of the contraband entering our institutions across the country. That money will, and we've also received just over $2 million ongoing to support those systems in place. So the goal will be within 3 years to have drone mitigation, the ability to prevent drones from entering our airspace, detect drones, and mitigate cell signals all within 3 years at all of our establishments. M'excuse, je pense que, ouais.
Est-ce qu'il y a aussi des aménagements?
Are you also planning to do some physical changes to establishments, like changing windows or making it more difficult for inmates to access windows?
That's part of the layered approach that we're using. So in some cases, there's different layers. There's one thing to mitigate the interdiction of contraband through technology. There's also old school, physical presence, dynamic security, and physical. Sometimes we'll use netting. We reinforce windows. We'll reinforce areas so that they can't break through, because believe it or not, some of the drones will actually fly to a specific window. So to be able to reinforce areas so they can't get into those for certain. And in terms of general infrastructure upgrades, yes, we're in dire need of infrastructure upgrades, and within the Correctional Service, a lot of our infrastructure is older, which was not built or designed with the idea of drone technology, for example, coming in.
Merci.
So a lot of our upgrades consider those pieces. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour cette intervention.
Thank you very much for this discussion. Given the time, I will suggest an adjournment or to suspend first to allow the witnesses to leave and set in the next set of witnesses. And we thank you for having taken time to join us here. We wish you a good day, and we will move on to the next set of witnesses. Very well. We return to our work for our third hour today. We are addressing Bill C-22, as you know, and we have with us several witnesses, some known to the committee, and I will quickly tell you who it is. Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Ramzi Nachef, Director General. From the Department of Justice, Kimberly Gibner, Deputy Assistant Deputy Minister, and Normand Wong, Acting General Counsel. Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Richard Bilodeau, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, and Shannon Eagle, Director General, and Fenton O, Director. And finally, from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Colonel Superintendent Richard Burchill. We can move into the questions. 6 minutes. MP Caputo.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the officials here. Can I ask, have any of the officials, the government is in the process of drafting amendments. Have any of you seen those amendments?
Yes, it's part of the we haven't seen every amendment that's come in because they go through the committee and we don't see those, but we do contribute our work to that.
Okay. Are you able to talk about the government amendments that you've seen?
I'm not at liberty to do that. I can refer you to the minister's comments yesterday in terms of amendments that were that he was contemplating and he announced. I understand that there's a process for amendments to be moved here at committee, and we will be happy to come back and provide our factual and our support in your consideration of those.
Now, you all, well, we'll start with you, Mr. Bilodeau. You have been obviously attuned to there's been a great deal of criticism on this bill. Now, you'd agree that much of that has surrounded Part 2, is that correct?
It's definitely the part that we at Public Safety have been the most involved in, and the discussions that I've had have been surrounding Part 2. Obviously, you've noted the coverage and the discussions. I think just statistically speaking, that would be accurate.
Well, if we're being candid, Part 2 deals with encryption and the lack of safeguards therein for encryption. Part 2 also leaves everything to, well, I shouldn't say everything, but nearly everything to a ministerial order that can be secret. And Part 2 fails to identify and define the precise categories of metadata. Those are just 3 of the issues. And when I say precise categories, that metadata being kept for 12 months. Would you be in a position, Mr. Bilodeau, to suggest or to comment on whether this bill could be split along the lines of Part 1 and Part 2?
That is not for me to opine on. The bill that's before Parliament right now in this committee is Part 1 and Part 2. You talked about what's in and what's out of the legislation. The legislation is intended, as we've talked about, to be a framework legislation that leaves some of the implementation to regulations, not just ministerial orders. There are set things that will need to be put in regulations like core providers and some of the capabilities and what kind of metadata will have to be retained in that context for up to a year. But it is intended to be a framework piece of legislation that brings a regulatory framework to ensure that it keeps pace with what's happening out in the digital world so that they can help and support law enforcement.
My reading is that a minister can designate a core provider through a ministerial order. That's correct?
The legislation provides for core providers in terms of Section 5 to be designated through regulation, through a publication of the Gazette, and that's how core providers are defined as part of the legislation. There are criteria, as you know, as well, that set out that. And then ministerial orders can also be used in a way to ensure that potentially targeted providers are able to put in place certain of the requirements of the legislation.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was thinking about something else, but I'll move on from that because what I'd really like to know is end-to-end encryption. We all know what that means, but a number of companies use encrypted technology. So, for instance, let's say Apple Health or something like that. They've got a lot of we could agree that that's very personal information, right? That would be contained on your smartphone about your health. I don't think anybody's going to dispute that. It attracts a high expectation of privacy. Let's say that's encrypted, okay? That's different than end-to-end encryption. A company like Signal offers a service that from one end to another, nobody can break that. That's end-to-end encryption. But what about when data is encrypted as part of the program? If Apple has the key to that encryption, would they not be required to track that data as part of this bill?
So you're correct that there are different types of encryption that can be done by end-to-end. If there's a communication, it can be a user encrypted. It's not just about communication. A user could have its own encryption where the provider does not have the key to that information. There are encryption models where the supplier, the provider, may have the key to that encrypted data. I can't speak to Apple. I'm not a technical expert in terms of what each company does and how they do encryption.
Just hypothetically is what I'm getting at.
No, I understand that. And so for the legislation or for in a situation where, in your example, the legislation does not automatically provide that the provider or Apple in this instance would have to keep data. They would have to be designated either as a core provider or through a ministerial order. So that process would need to happen before any obligations are imposed on them.
I'm assuming that, but my point, though, sir, is this. It could happen, right? So what I'm getting at is that information that is meant to be encrypted and is itself encrypted could itself be compromised beyond end-to-end encryption. We're not just talking about end-to-end encryption because we were told that that would introduce a systemic vulnerability if somebody had to disrupt that. But I'm talking about data that is encrypted data, but nonetheless there is a roadmap to it in the provider. What I'm saying and what you're telling me here that's of concern is that encryption, not end-to-end, but encryption that is provided by the service provider could then be subject to this bill. Do you get where I'm going with this?
I understand, yes.
Is that not accurate? Like, basically what I'm saying is, isn't encrypted data still subject to this bill?
A quick reply, please.
If there was a judicially authorized warrant to access information, then it would depend on where the information lies, where encryption is, and also whether the legislation or the regulations or orders apply. It is a case by case. It's hard for me to speculate on a hypothetical because it would depend on the requirements that are out in the regulations that we would be developing in consultation and in the context of ministerial orders, would be doing with the provider, because it's a part of the legislation. We need to consult with them. And then I would also say that in the context of the ministerial order, we would not be able to do it in a way that would, or the provider could refuse to do it if it introduced a systemic vulnerability.
But see, in this case...
Thank you for that. There'll be other turns. MP Sodi for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. My first set of questions will be directed to Mr. Nashef. Okay, Nashef. Okay, perfect, from CSIS. To begin, what extent do you believe that Bill C-22 will bring CSIS's capabilities closer to matching those of our Five Eyes partners?
Thanks for the question. So, in fact, that's the exact objective of the bill from CSIS's perspective. So, as has been mentioned here many times today, in fact, we're the only Five Eyes country and one of the only sort of like-minded, if we want to use that term, country, if we compare ourselves to the Europeans, that is absent a lawful access regime. So really for us, this would be a significant bound to put us in a position of equal footing with partners in terms of what we are able to get, again, under judicial authorization. Right now, just to sort of make a quick point of it, we rely on ad hoc arrangements with a range of different electronic service providers, which give us a real sort of unpredictable and widely varying set of outcomes, depending on which region of the country and which provider it is that we're working with on any given warrant, let's say. So, so for us, again, a significant step that will put us on much closer to even footing with key partners. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your answer. We've had some people say that this bill will create some sort of a cybersecurity risk. What is the cost to national security if we don't pass Bill C-22, particularly as encrypted communications become the default for threat actors?
Again, another good question. I mean, I think for us, there have been some questions earlier today around the risks of the bill. I think something that's kind of not necessarily been discussed today is the risk of not having a lawful access regime in this country. And so it's been a 30-year journey to get to the point of maturity of the sort of current bill in front of you, and that has been with significant ups and downs. I think the cost is increasing, to be really frank with you. I would say, you know, you can hear it from me and from CSIS and from counterparts on this panel, but I would say don't necessarily take our word. There are significant other cross-partisan analyses, including the NSI COP report on Going Dark, that really get to the heart of the costs. And I would say that the slippage we are seeing, even when we have a federal court warrant, in terms of the information that we are authorized to get but still cannot get, is increasing, and that gap for us really is an immediate and a tangible one in terms of the safety of Canada and Canadians on what for CSIS, for example, are the highest harm threats. So we're talking about espionage, foreign interference, and terrorism primarily. So so that cost is here, it's increasing, and this bill is a significant proposal for us that would really modernize that set of tools for us.
As you're aware, Peel Regional Police recently laid more than 100 criminal charges in what investigators described as one of the largest extortion cases in the region's history. It involved violent extortions targeting members of the South Asian community and their businesses. How would lawful access tools improve CSIS's ability to investigate those networks more efficiently?
So I might give a bit of a general answer and then perhaps pass to my colleague, Chief Superintendent Burchill. Really for us, what it is about is being able to advance investigations and get better investigative outcomes in a quicker time frame. We are only talking, as I mentioned previously, about the highest harm threats here, and as such, it is of particular importance that we're able to improve the investigative outcomes because, as has been raised by the Minister and many other speakers today, that erosion has been significant. It's been over decades, and we are really at an inflection point where I think a significant improvement on those tools, a modernization of those tools is required. So maybe to speak specifically to the types of crime you mentioned, I'll pass to Rick. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. And from a law enforcement perspective, I would say that the PO case represents, they were able to have the capability to get the evidence and bring charges. But the amount of extortion cases across the country, we have a national task force assisting police of jurisdiction as well as RCMP, where we're the police of jurisdiction, to try to have better outcomes. And the way that extortion cases unfold is particularly complex and difficult from a lawful access perspective. So having the tools that this legislation would provide would certainly enhance those investigations and provide better outcomes for law enforcement.
Go to the officials from the Department of Justice. Apple recently testified that they said anyone can walk through a back door, but Bill C-22 requires that providers be capable of executing a lawfully issued warrant. Can you clarify for the committee the legal distinction between a back door and a court-supervised lawful access mechanism?
Thank you for the question. A back door, the way that I understand it, is the systemic vulnerability that we've been talking about in relation to Part 2. Lawful authorizations, as our colleagues from CSIS and the RCMP have said, are obtained from the court. So this is when police or national security requires to go get a warrant. There are certain requirements to obtain that warrant in terms of evidence. And the issue is that we have the tools, many of the tools already in the CSIS Act and the Criminal Code to allow our authorities to get access. The problem is that when they go to the service provider cannot allow them access.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you for that, MP Sodi. Merci, Madame de Bellefeuille. À vous la parole pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Bellefeuille, you have the floor, 6 minutes. Microphone, please. Thank you for being here, Mr. Bilodeau. I will tell you how I feel. From the outset, what we hear from witnesses, it's as though they don't understand the bill itself. When they testify, they kind of make us doubt the bill because they keep saying it's not what's intended in the bill. It's like they say, well, look, that's not really what we intend to do. Trust us, it's not really what's in the bill. It seems clear if everything that we don't quite get, you put it clearly in the bill, then we would all know what's going on, especially about the back doors. Because right now the idea is that all enterprises that we have met, apart from, the police institutions, there's not that many people who agree, at least with some of the provisions of C-22. And I think that one of your responsibilities is to ensure that the committee be able to understand bills. So stop talking about intentions, but specify exactly what you intend to do, black on white, in the bill, being specific. So I hope that the government, hearing everything that it's hearing and all the concerns, and I know that it would like to get C-22 to be adopted consensually, the government surely also hopes that you will be more specific and take advantage of an opportunity to provide the details. I'm not a tech specialist. There are a lot of things I don't know. I depend on experts, and experts, all of them, tell us that if C-22 is adopted as is, it would be the end of any protection for personal data. And, I could name a number of people who have said this. So here's my question. Do you think it's necessary to specify, definitions, or even to specify who's excluded from the application of this bill if it becomes law? Because Desjardins, for example, and asked us, will I be covered by this? It will be, regulation that will decide that, you see, so people don't know. Could we get through C-22 with some help, some texts that specify exactly what the government intends to do? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I would say, and the minister said this yesterday in speaking to this, and we have also indicated a number of times that if anything can be made clear in the bill, we're happy to take the suggestions and requests for that, and you as parliamentarians will be amending the bill. The government said that they would do so regarding encryption throughout, to clarify that, basically, end-to-end encryption. And for us, end-to-end encryption, it's really about not addressing systemic vulnerabilities, and it is excluded clearly in the bill to not add any more systemic vulnerabilities. The government made that clear as well. There's something else that really should be mentioned quickly here. The bill creates a framework to help specify who this would apply to, principal suppliers, and there's a process. It's a transparent process involving consultation via regulations. Criteria would have to be respected. Same for ministerial orders, governor and council orders. We would have to have discussions before those come down. The way the bill is made, if everything is in legislation, it doesn't necessarily allow the regulations and the legal system to move forward as technology moves forward. What you're saying, Mr. Bilodeau, is the regulatory part gives you more agility. It can be shifted to adjust to ongoing changes. But often the RCMP has told us, and police officers have told us as well, that they've been waiting for this for 30 years. But yes, that's fine. But I think that the U.S. and U.K. aren't good examples of the protection of private life. So when I hear we're trying to copy them, that makes me worry, because here in Canada and Quebec, we have a deep respect for privacy, and we understand the needs of police investigators and so on, of course, but we want to ensure that everything's there to help them, but still provide guarantees. The regulatory elements and steps, yes, I get that, but could we not work step by step, adopting a bill with more specific detail, and then 2 years later we come back to, adjust it, review it based on what will have taken place, because it's a big change in culture, this C-22. It's not just a matter of, catching up with the Joneses and so on, doing what everyone else is doing. Perhaps we're already doing really well. So that's what I'm looking for. Do you think we could do that step by step? What I will answer is that be it the bill, be it the regulations, they will have to respect the Charter. Yes, this bill is informed by discussions with our Five Eyes partners, but we have developed it keeping in mind our Charter, our Canadian legislation, and all our legislation must respect the Charter. And my colleagues here at the Department of Justice produced the Charter statements. So whether it be the law itself or be the regulations, everything will have to respect the Charter. And there are a number of criteria about the protection of privacy that must be taken into account in regulations, not only in legislation. So we think we've reached a good balance, that yes, we have here means to respond to the needs of police agencies and the Canada Security Intelligence Services to protect Canadians from threats, but in a context of protection of Charter rights. Thank you very much for that discussion. MP Kirkland, 5 minutes.
My first questions will be directed to Mr. Nashev. Thank you for being here today. I'm appreciative that you're here, because I've found anytime I've I've asked questions of you in the past, whether it's in this committee or otherwise. You speak in a language that Canadians understand. Sometimes that is very hard for technical pieces, right? For people to truly understand what's going on. So I have some important questions. So would CSIS consider a government-mandated access point within an encrypted system to be a vulnerability from a cybersecurity standpoint, even if it's authorized and controlled?
So you might have jinxed me with the front end of your statement, just in the sense that there are a lot of layers to the question you just asked me. And in fact, I mean, not to challenge the premise, but it would be my view that that's not what we're asking for is a government mandated access point. It would be again, intercept capable. That's the language we would use.
Okay, thank you. That helps me. That answers my question. So would you agree, though, that any mechanism created for lawful access, okay, so it's a mechanism created for lawful access, it's inherently dual use, so it could potentially be discovered or exploited outside of authorized use? Potentially.
Yeah, there is no technical system by any means that is 100% foolproof by any stretch. I mean, the only small footnote I would give you there is that I might leave it there and I'll let you keep going.
Okay.
But yes.
I may ask you about that footnote later. Has CSIS assessed whether large-scale metadata retention creates a higher value target for foreign intelligence services or cyber criminal groups?
So it wouldn't necessarily be a CSIS assessment there. I mean, it would be a national security partner that would have the more centralized expertise on the cyber side. But my short answer would be, yeah, that's a thing that has been considered and thought through. I would offer maybe my footnote now because I teased it, and I think the point I started with is the point I will start with again here, and then I'll finish with the second one, which is just that, no, there is no technical system that is 100% foolproof by any stretch, and we have heard what has been said here, and so take the point. I would say also, though, you have a group of people who work in a national security community whose fundamental ethos is to protect Canadians, Canadian systems, and the critical infrastructure of this country. So
perfect, understood. So I think that I'm coming to a place of helping Canadians understand this and helping them feel like they can trust it. Okay, because from on a human level, one-to-one, when you're talking to anyone, they would feel like large-scale retention of metadata would be a higher value target. Put yourself in the place of a bad guy, right? You're a bad guy. It's a higher value target, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Bilodeau, thank you. The Public Safety Minister has said the metadata provision will be brought in line with U.S. law. He mentioned that. But the American Lawful Access Statute, CALEA, imposes no data retention requirement at all. It's an interception regime. It requires providers to be able to hand over communications under a warrant. It does not require them to stockpile metadata in advance on everyone, just in case. So there's nothing in U.S. law resembling the up to a year suspicionless retention this bill contemplates. So can you be specific? Which U.S. statute would he be referring to that would get us up to date and in line with U.S. law?
So I think that statement may have been corrected following the minister's remarks. What I understood it to mean, or what was said during that conversation, was really about bringing encryption in line with CALEA, and CALEA has specific language around end-to-end encryption and not being able to force providers to decrypt end-to-end encryption, and that was where that was the intent of that statement.
So that brings to mind then Mr. Caputo's question, because I'm finding myself, as many Canadians are, not as technical and understanding. So end-to-end encryption, I understand. Yeah. However, there are encrypted items on my cell phone right now that are not really end-to-end encryption. So
the distinction that the legislation makes is that if it's encrypted, if an electronic service provider does not have the capability to decrypt your data because you have encrypted it, not yourself, but your device has encrypted the data on your phone, and they don't have the key, so to speak, then the legislation wouldn't force they can't force it because the supplier or the provider does not have the capability to do it. So there's a distinction between where the data is encrypted.
So
Thank you, Madam Kirkland. I'm so sorry. MP Housefather for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think this is a good opportunity for us because we have to prepare amendments to the bill. And one of the amendments that I think is very important is the one that Ms. Kirkland was just talking about with respect to encryption, bringing this into line with the U.S. statute to say that no company who doesn't have a key to the encryption has to create one or could be ordered to create one under an order. I mean, I think that's very important. But I think there's another element that I think is important in this bill to look at, which is the systemic vulnerability issue and the definition of systemic vulnerability and its interplay with the orders. I think it'll be relatively simple to craft amendments to say, for example, that if you create a systemic vulnerability, you can't be forced in an order to create a systemic vulnerability. And I think we can create amendments to do that it would be very agreeable. But I have an issue with the definition of systemic vulnerability. Right now, it says systemic vulnerability means a vulnerability in the electronic protections of an electronic service that creates a substantial risk that secure information could be accessed by a person who does not have any right or authority to do so. So a substantial risk is very high. I mean, it means it's not just any risk. It's not a plausible risk. It's not a risk. It's not a material risk. It's not a real risk. It's not a credible risk. It's a higher threshold. I mean, it's a lower threshold. I'm sorry. It basically means that if somebody says, well, I think there's a plausible risk that by doing this, we're going to create a systemic vulnerability, they could still be forced to do it. So I guess my question for you, because I'm not satisfied with the word substantial risk, I understand there may be a reason not to just remove the word substantial and put a risk, because that would be then any risk, irrespective of how immaterial it is. What word should I propose? Do you recommend that I propose as an amendment? Or, for example, if I were to use the word a plausible risk, what then do you believe would be the legal interpretation? How would that be viewed? What would be the effect?
It's a good question. I might ask my colleagues from the Department of Justice to weigh in. I'll give them an opportunity to think about it. At the end of the day, substantial risk was used to provide as much to again strike that balance between providing the framework for lawful access and making sure that we're not creating those systemic vulnerabilities. And the last thing we want this legislation to be used for is to weaken, I think as one of previous witnesses said, we don't want to harm Canadian security writ large, right? Whether it's through this or cybersecurity. And that's why I would add to Mr. Nasheff's answer earlier that there's a lot of data that's being retained now, and companies are used to doing this, and they take a lot of precautions. They all have very good, some of the firms have very good cybersecurity hygiene and take really important steps to protect that, and we would expect that to continue under this lawful access regime, because some of the data might still be kept.
But I agree, but then you're speaking to why we shouldn't be using the threshold of substantial risk, right? Because substantial risk means you could be asking to do something, and they say, I think there's a real risk here. I think there's a plausible risk here, and they're still forced to do it. Yeah. So what, again, come back to my question, if I say the word a plausible risk, what is the position of the Department of Justice as to what that would mean? Would that make any change that would undermine the purpose of this legislation?
Thank you for the question. I don't know if I'm going to be much assistance on this. I think, Mr. Housefather, you have highlighted the fact that there can be a variety of words that can be used, and I think you rightly point out that it will change the scale. At the end of the day, it's a policy decision and how this is decided, and that's the Minister of Public Safety's responsibility in that part of the Act.
And, okay, Monsieur le Président, est-ce que j'en ai une minute? Okay.
I have a minute left. Very good. I just want to ask a follow-up question. All right, that's very clear. Thank you. But I think that we do want to be responsible, but we want to be responsible in a way that doesn't insist on a company do something. If a company says that plausibly this could create a risk, that the secure information could be accessed, if you don't want to suggest another word to be suggested, then I will use the word plausible. I mean, if I were to put the question, does it work in French as well, plausible? So if I use that adjective, will this create a material difficulty for the government? Mr. Chair, I will answer in French then. From a point of view, a non-legal point of view, just in plain language, plausible and substantial, something that's plausible is it's a probability. This could happen. So it's much lower. It's not the same category of a substantial risk. So I don't want to take out my dictionary necessarily here, but these words are show a different level of risk. Yes, but the idea is not to have them in the same category. The idea is what it is for the company. A plausible risk isn't the same as a substantial risk. Plausible is like a possibility that any risk could occur, how much the severity of the risk. Very well, that's very clear, very helpful, surely. Ms. Bellefeuille, 2.5 minutes. I'm very impressed, Chair. You can see that all parliamentarians from all parties, we really want to understand this to be able to carry the best possible bill. We've got questions from everyone, even on the government side. They are concerned to adopt the best possible text, given that this is an important bill. It will change the culture of Canada and Quebec, and we want to make sure it's the right one. I find this is very relevant, what my colleague Mr. Housefather is putting forward, because we are looking for the right words to really get on paper what the government wants, what the Department of Public Safety wants. I'd like you to tell me more about metadata. All witnesses have spoken to the risk of long-term storage and keeping data, and I know from having studied it a bit that perhaps in the regulatory step we can say that in a year, it doesn't mean that all data everywhere will be kept for a year, and in any case that would be specified in the regulations, but not stating it, not writing it into the bill, that's what's creating confusion, insecurity, and a lack of trust. I think that if your intention is not to ensure that all data is kept at 100% of all Canadians everywhere, then we need to put that somewhere into the bill to reassure people. Because right now, that's what it looks like. It's not like up until such and such a time, or depending on the category, or depending on the quality of the data, and so on and so forth. So do you think that could be specified in the bill? Don't ask me to write in an amendment, because I wouldn't know quite how to put it, but is there somewhere that you could suggest we put that in? Well, of course, any bill can always be rendered more clear, and I would leave it to parliamentarians to make the necessary amendments. And we have said this in a number of places, and I think we've discussed this with you as well. What we're really trying to do here is specify the types of metadata that will be useful for investigations to be kept for a period of time that will be useful for investigations. It could be less than a year. It depends on the type of data, of course. You're quite right. If you wish, we could discuss the need for specific types of data. My colleagues at the RCMP could tell you more about this. They could tell you why keeping metadata for 1 year is relevant to investigations, because very often the way investigations proceed, you see, is not on the first day that you run out and get all the metadata about such and such a person who may have committed a crime. So it is necessary to have that data kept long enough to be able to access it. We're really trying to close the gap that exists at present. There are some the suppliers who aren't keeping data more than a week, let's say, but there are lots of metadata in telecommunications and electronic services who do keep the data for longer than a week. So in the system, there is already metadata that is kept for some time. Thank you very much. MP Capito, 5 minutes.
Chair, I want to pick up on what Mr. Housefather was talking about, and I wasn't planning on going on this, but he makes a very good point. Now, if I understand his point correctly, and maybe I don't, but what I understand is a general concern. You know, who says substantial likelihood or whatever it is? What about a possibility or plausibility? If I could make one suggestion or one thought, it's that business hates uncertainty, right? Like, the uncertainty in this bill is what is driving business to come out so clearly, because there's even if it's a possibility, then what a business, if I'm a business owner, or if I'm advising shareholders or whatever, and I have uncertainty and it's possibility, and they say, well, the recourse, you've got judicial review. Well, somebody might disagree with you, right? So what I want to underscore to the officials is that uncertainty is so pronounced here that when you are advising the government, please recognize that, because even with metadata, we don't know what classes of metadata will be preserved for up to a year. And that's a point that's been made here. Yeah, well, we don't need to preserve anything for a full year. Well, which is it? I get you want to put it in regulation, and I get it changes, but the Act is so silent on those things. So I'll open it up for comments, and if not, I've got a question on what I had to say. Does anybody have any comments on that?
I think what I would say is that when you mentioned regulation, when core providers, so the first class of core providers, there's always going to be a first in the regulation. It'll be set out clearly in the regulations what metadata needs to be retained and for how long.
Oh, I'm aware of that, but the problem is that we around this, that's precisely my point. We around this table don't know what that's going to look like, right? And I get that that's how regulation works. But the uncertainty, again, we come back to that word of uncertainty because it's for up to a year. We don't know what type of metadata is going to take priority. We don't know whether location services are going to be there for up to a year. A year is a long time, and I understand the argument's been made, well, we need this. No one said why a year. That's another point. We talked about, well, is it industry standard? Australia's got 2 years. Sweden's got 10 months, but there are also nuances there. But there's that uncertainty again. Another mechanism or reason for uncertainty is in Section 14, and that is the duty to assist. If I was a business owner, I think that I could rightfully fear this. Does Section 14 not conceivably require a electronic service provider to create hardware or software to bring it up to snuff, to bring it up to government standards, so to speak, so that the data can be retained? I hope that question is clear.
Ask my colleague, Ms. Heigl, to respond.
Absolutely. The expectation is that we are setting a standard across the current practices, that it is ad hoc, it is based on individual agreements. I'll take the telecommunications class, as we call it. They are not the same when law enforcement goes to one provider over another one within the telecommunications world. They don't know if they're going to get the same information. So if you're running an investigation and you're 6 months into something, and it's probably taking you 6 months just to figure out which telecommunications provider it is, you're going to get a different set of information from different telcos. That is fundamental within setting a regulation. So there is an expectation. It's more than an expectation. You know what you get.
You want uniformity there. You want to know that when the information when we need information, we want to know it's there. I get that. But when I read this, if you're a small ESP, that might cost $1 million to get up to that level. How do we as parliamentarians around this table say, I get why you want uniformity, but when we are sitting around this table, how do we address that for a small telco, or for a small ESP, I should say, $1 million might be the smallest amount that they have to pay, but that could cripple a company of that size. How do we respond to that?
I would say that one of the key elements, again, I am going to use the word regulation, but deciding on who a core provider is, part of those factors are going to be how big is your client base? How are you national? Are you regional? How regional are you? How small are you? What is the service that you provide? There needs to be a very detailed conversation with these companies so that we can make a well-oiled regulation.
And therein is my issue. Just 10 seconds, please, Mr. Chair. But therein is the issue, is the uncertainty right there. Yes, we're going to factor these things in, but even factoring them in, you and I can't decide what that would look like. And that uncertainty, I think, is what is driving a number of the questions here.
Your point is really well made. Thank you. In a short amount of time. Député Ramsey, pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
I will leave the floor to Mr. Housefather for the next question, please.
Merci beaucoup, Jacques.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to come back on that same point that Frank elaborated on, that Claude elaborated on. If I were to come and say, instead of substantial risk, it's a credible risk based on objective professional standards, so we know have assessed what the level of risk is and what it's based on. Can the people from Justice please tell me if that would be inconsistent with wording that we have in other legislation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think you've posited something really important to think about. We haven't thought about it, and we're certainly open to.
Would you be willing to exchange with the committee on that, like before? But anyways, I think I'm going to prepare something onto that level, and I'd be very interested to hear from you. Merci beaucoup. Je vais passer ça à Jacques.
I turn the floor back to Jacques. Perhaps someone on the panel is familiar with the memorandum provided to the Privacy Commissioner with its recommendations. The committee didn't have much time to look at those recommendations, so I'd like your opinion on them. In particular, Recommendation 5, which deals with the governor in council and ministerial powers and suggests that the criteria be necessary and proportional. Thank you for the question. And we've been advised now of that information provided to the Privacy Commissioner. Many of those criteria, the wording used by Mr. Dufresne, would be part of the analysis carried out when regulations are drawn up, because many things must be taken into account when regulations are drawn up and ministerial orders and so on. So that would be taken into account at that point. Very well. I suppose we must take you on your word to the effect that this will be taken into account down the road. Yes, there is a criteria to that effect in legislation. Statutory. Recommendation 6. We know that there is a possibility for a provider to invoke systemic vulnerability as a factor, and we also know that the government or minister cannot require anything that would endanger via that systemic vulnerability. So that's a request at a higher level, I think. Yes, Recommendation 6, the intention there is that there is a responsibility to decide what the systemic vulnerability would be, and the government bears that burden. Our analysis is that the electronic service provider is the better placed than the government to do that. They know the system. They've administered them. They manage them. They exploit them. So it's up to them to say, you're asking us to do X, Y, Z, but if we do this, it would create this systemic vulnerability for us. So there would be a discussion, and based on their representations, we would decide whether the ministerial order should be given in the way it was originally written, and then the supplier would have that chance to be involved in the decision. In fact, it's a statutory requirement to consult with the supplier. All right, so Section 12, Clause 12, where it stated that the supplier must obey the notice. If there is a judicial review, is there a way to apply that in a measured way, or does the provider have to necessarily respect every element in it? My understanding of Section 12 is that it doesn't say, you have to do this even if there is a systemic vulnerability that it would create for you. All right, but let's say this becomes a legal case. Does the supplier have to respond to the order and follow the order up until such time as a court tells them that they didn't have to? Or could they say, no, we have to wait for the legal decision? My understanding of legal review is that the supplier can ask for a stay of proceedings on the application of the order while the review is being carried out. I'll allow my colleagues to provide further context, but there's the irreparable harm test that could be applied at that point. It will have to be quick. We need to move on to the next question.
Alors, le député Ao pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Over to MP Ao for 5 minutes.
I don't know who can answer this question. Now, there's been much discussion about how long and how should the suppliers retain the information. But the question is, there's another aspect. Once the information gets out of the hands of the supplier into the hands of the police, how are they going to deal with the information? For example, where and how and for how long they are going to keep the information, and when will they destroy the information? Now, there could be different scenarios. So number one is that if the RCMP got to suspect that the person, may have committed a crime, and then get the information from the supplier, and then in the later day, discover that this person is not really engaged in the criminal activities. So number one, when will they destroy that information about the person? And secondly, will the person be informed? Will they ever be informed that his information has been given to the RCMP, and whether there could be some verification that the information has been destroyed?
Colleague from the RCMP who can answer all of those questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question through the chair. What I could say is that when we get to a point when there is a crime that we're investigating, we get to the point where we're dealing with data, then we're into a judicial authorization that a judge has authorized. With that comes a return to justice. So if we're authorized to seize the data, we go to a supplier, we go to a service provider, they're able to give us what we've got through the court order. We have to do a return to justice. So usually, say generally every 30 days, we have to go back to court to say what we've done. First of all, what we went in to get specifically, what we took specifically, what we're currently doing with it, where it's stored for continuity of evidence, and then why we need to keep it for another 30 days. So there's returns to justice and return to court to tell them what we're doing and how long we're doing it. If at some point the judge decides or the investigators decide we don't need to keep this data anymore, it's destroyed, and I suspect that the investigators would advise a suspect that they're no longer being investigated and they've destroyed any evidence related to them. But there is a court process with the return to justice as part of a warrant or a production order that we have to go back and report to court what we're doing with what we've seized.
So in that case, you are saying that that person which has been investigated would be informed?
I guess depends on the circumstances. If informing the person sacrifices the integrity of the investigation, probably not. But if at some point there's charges laid and that person has been eliminated as a suspect or part of the file, then they would probably be notified. But just, I guess, rest assured that there is a process with the judicial authorization that we need to go back to the justice every so many days. It's the judge that decides how often, and if it's very sensitive or if it's information that they feel they want to keep more control over, they may require us to come back every 2 weeks. Hard to say, but it's up to the judge.
Well, this is not exactly the answer I want, but anyway, I would move on. So scenario 2, so the person, was being charged, but he was eventually found not guilty. Then again, what will happen to the information that has been collected through this process about him or her?
So for the general disposition of exhibits at the end of a trial, whether conviction or no conviction, would be to have a disposition. So if there was a conviction, they would probably be retained. But if there was a stay or if the person was not convicted of a crime, then there would have to be a disposition of those exhibits with the court saying, this is what we seized during the investigation, we're now going to be disposing of it, and give proof of that disposal.
Oh, good, thank you. Now, if another question related. Now, we are being told that this new arrangement of lawful access is needed, because of the investigation and other kinds of necessity. I get that. But on the other hand, how can we prevent these kind of measures being seen as necessary? At the end, it become measures of convenience. Because we're talking about two concepts, right? The reasonable suspicion or reasonable doubt, reasonable ground to believe. So there's a difference there. And then I would say the threshold for the first one, grounds to suspect is lower, much lower than the ground to believe. So where would one begins and ends? And I would suspect that there would be gray areas in between. So in that kind of situation, how can we be sure that these will not become a measure of convenience for the police to abuse, if I can use that word, for obtaining personal information?
Very short, please.
Well, I can assure you that as a reasonable grounds to suspect is at the very beginning stages of an investigation. And the jeopardy associated to having somebody specific metadata, that requires reasonable grounds to believe and a general production order. I'd ask my colleagues from Justice to correct me if I'm wrong, but once you get to the point where you're seizing data, you're into reasonable grounds to believe, and there's a bona fide investigation and a victim in a crime attached to that. But when you're saying...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm being very rude, but that's unfortunately what we need to do. MP Al-Sud for 5 minutes.
Let's try that again. Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being with us today. I am not a usual member on this committee, but it is a privilege to be with all of you given the importance of the topic at hand today. I believe it was Mr. Nashif who mentioned earlier that we are the only Five Eyes nation, the only, and I quote, like-minded country in the absence of lawful access. And I find with legislation like this, there are always concerns pertaining to privacy, and that is, of course, always an important question. And one of those concerns I find in this idea is this floating notion that Bill C-22 would create some sort of mass surveillance, or that it would allow law enforcement to access Canadians' information without legal authorization. I'd like to hear you speak to that, Mr. Nashif, if possible, and I'm happy to open it to the rest of the panel if expertise allows.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So I'm glad you raised it because I think it's one of the things that has been most in the coverage in the testimony that probably most needs myth-busting, to be frank, by this group here and others. I'll speak from CSIS's perspective, but it also, I think, carries for law enforcement on this front. But there's been a lot of discussion about the retention of data considerations in the bill. To actually access that data, so, it goes without saying, it hasn't come up that much today, but to reiterate, no direct access for either law enforcement or CSIS to any systems of telecommunication service providers. So, fact, intent of the bill, and in the letter of the bill. So we have that sort of established. for CSIS or for law enforcement to actually get access to that data. So this idea of mass surveillance gives you the sense that we are floating through and swimming in the waters of the data, looking at it, using it for things investigative or otherwise. None of that is the case here. What we're talking about is there's a retention of a limited amount of data for very specific investigative reasons, which we can access only with, in our case, a federal court warrant. So significantly high threshold in a high harm investigation, as I've mentioned earlier, related basically to espionage, foreign interference, or terrorism. So that would be how I would frame it to you. So it's a much narrower actual access to the data that is being collected for a very particular reason at a very high threshold with significant oversight.
And with this notion of the data storage being, of course, a sensitive topic, but a very important one, how do you find this legislation addresses the challenge of data being stored outside of Canada? And what improvements does it bring compared to the current system we have?
I'm not sure I'm the best to answer all parts of that question, but let me take a first cut and then somebody can come in with a bit of fire support. So I think maybe taking a half step back might be helpful here to talk about the data storage. There has been a significant amount of questions, MP Kirkland and some others, really necessary questions about does that increase the risk of the government mandating specific companies to retain extra data than they would have from a proprietary perspective for a set of reasons. I mean, the first thing I would say is many of these companies, but not all, retain a huge amount of data for all kinds of different reasons, data that goes far beyond what we're asking for in this bill. In many cases, that's for billing reasons. In other cases, it's for marketing reasons. It's for a whole range of different sort of motivations, let's say. So this idea, I think that the fundamental culture of how data is retained in this country, I think we're already there. I mean, the amount of times we or folks we know hit accept all in any given day is really, really high and should be scary. This isn't the Rubicon that we're crossing with this bill. This is the data-driven world we have been living in for a while already. In terms of the vulnerabilities around requiring additional retention of data, I mean, the half step back I'd like to take might be to look at sort of the financial sector as a parallel, not a perfect comparator, but as one that's, let's say, a little less charged than what we're talking about here. In the financial services world, more records and better records are seen as an inherently positive addition of robustness. Again, it is incredibly important, and we have been discussing that today, and again, it is at the heart of what we are trying to do to ensure that we are not introducing unnecessary vulnerabilities. I have said a number of times that there is no technological system that is 100% foolproof and unable to potentially be leveraged in certain circumstances. But I think what we're talking about here is proportional, it's reasonable, it's limited, and it's for very clear applications, which are, again, in our case, highest harm national security investigations. In the case of law enforcement, highest harm criminal and transnational organized crime applications. And I think that parallel of the financial sector where the same thing for different reasons is seen as a net positive, where in this case it is seen as an unnecessary, or at least it's been bandied about a little bit as an unnecessary vulnerability. I think it gives us a little bit of perspective that could be helpful here.
Merci, Monsieur le député Al-Soud. Vous faites une très bonne impression comme première.
Thank you, MP Al-Soud. You are doing very well. The first time you're speaking here among us, and there's a high risk that we'll invite you in again. This brings our third hour to an end. Before I wind this up, I would like to share with you a prerogative that I will use. As everyone has, I did see that we have not had time to reach a formal consensus on our work in the days to come. But I do see, I have heard that all would like more time to discuss this bill. Therefore, I suggest that we hear more witnesses next Tuesday on C-22 for a 2-hour period, that the last date to submit amendments be put off until next Monday at 7:30, and that on the 4th of June between 3:30 and 6:30 p.m. we have our 3 first hours of clause-by-clause consideration. That said, good evening.